10 years ago, doors opened in the human world. Monsters came out of them, and as a response to that invasion, the awakened began to appear. These awakened individuals became hunters who pursued the monsters. But what does it matter? Revealing a young man who is hit by a stone. He is Kang Ji-hyung, and he considers himself a loser. Moreover, the three boys in front of him are his perpetrators, asking him to start arriving. The young man explains that he's at a high school, specializing in awakened, and all he has is the ability to regenerate. It's supposed to be an S-rank ability, but not for him, since the price of regenerating is hellish pain. He adds that after that, his bullies attack him, laugh at him, and even more when he heals. Because of that, he can't even prove he's being bullied, and the police and teachers can't do anything for him, since his perpetrators are S-rank awakened, who receive special treatment from the government. Then, Ji-hyung explains that the only reason he puts up with all this is for his mother, who, by the way, asks if he has already eaten and how things are. He replies that everything's great, while thinking that his father left when he was 5 years old. He also confirms that he'll be able to become a hunter when he graduates. For that reason, he has to endure it, as with his ability, he'll at least be a C-rank hunter. He concludes that his income will be small, but at least they'll be able to live in a better place, him and his mom. Or at least, that's since those bastards, his perpetrators, beat her until she was left in a vegetative state. They say it was an accident, since they happened to go to his mom's restaurant, and while she was serving the pain food, one of them admired her figure to grab her by the wrist and ask what she thought of him, as he had the ability to make diamonds. But she broke free, accidentally hitting the boy's phone, which fell to the floor. That act annoyed the boy, who then attacked her. The coward claimed that his abilities accidentally activated. That angers Ji-hyung, as he knows them and knows it wasn't a coincidence, that it wasn't an accident, hurting himself with the rage he had toward those who hurt his precious mother. So somewhere, the three boys were near a portal. One of them asks if the lady will be okay, wondering what will happen if she dies. Just as Tae-soo comes out of the portal, saying that no one cares, explaining that they're young enough to be protected by law, and besides, they are awakened. But just as his companion was about to say something, he asks if he thinks it was his first time hitting someone. It's then that Ji-hyung appears and asks why he did it, starting to walk towards them, while the young man asks why he did it, shouting because he hurt his mother. Upon hearing that, Tae-soo smirks, since he didn't know she was his mother, cursing the woman in front of her son, who was crying out of rage. But before he could do anything, a diamond spear was embedded in his chest by the bully, who, by the way, comments that he almost flirted with her, laughing about it. That angers Ji-hyung even more, who grabs the diamond and starts pulling it from his chest, managing to pull out the spear, and immediately he curses them, but Tae-soo already had another attack prepared. And with the movement, a rain of diamond spears pierces the young man. After that, his perpetrator asks who he thinks he is, calling him a loser. But those words cause Ji-hyung to awaken, and he starts walking in towards them, cursing them as he approaches, gravely injured. Tae-soo says he's tough and asks his companion to show the powers of Taeyos, something the boy immediately obeys, causing a lightning bolt to strike the young man, electrocuting him, causing him to fall to his knees, then pass out. Seeing the young man's condition, the perpetrators decide, but Ji-hyung wakes up, grabs one of their legs, and asks where he thinks he's going. That act makes Tae-soo angry. Wrapping his hand in diamond, he punches the injured young man. Those punches are repeated over and over again as he curses him, since he can't even protect his mother, ending with his fist in the opposing young man's mouth. For a moment, he doesn't react, but in a burst of anger, he bites the diamond while revealing a threatening look, scaring Tae-soo. Then, his electric friend calls him. He asks what he wants, and if they're scared. But the young man says it's not that, and that something's wrong with. One of them comments that it's a blood door, while the electric guy says they have to report it. But Tae-soo has a macabre idea, pointing at Ji-hyung, and using his ability to create a diamond stone that throws him into the portal. But before entering the portal, the young man threatens them, saying that he's going to eliminate. That's when Taesu tells him to try if he can get out. After that, Ji-hyung falls to the ground inside the portal. When he opens his eyes, he remembers the phenomenon where a door turns red and monsters stop coming. The professor adds that not much has been revealed about it, and the reason is that no one has entered a blood door and come out alive, revealing to us the sea of monsters, heading straight towards Ji-hyung, who was defenseless on the ground. They reach him, then begin to eat, tearing his skin with each bite, breaking his bones with each monster that feeds him, reducing it into a pile of broken bones. However, new research has shown that those who enter a blood door turn into monsters. At that moment, Ji-hyung begins to regenerate, but starts taking on a new form due to the mana inside the door that starts to transform him. And as he was close to completing the transformation, he remembers his mother, but not just her. He also remembers his perpetrators and what they did to her. Entering a state of madness, suffering from unbearable pain, until at one point he punches the ground. The impact of the punch catches the attention of nearby monsters, who then look at him. Immediately, they activate and run towards him to eat him again. However, Ji-hyung is no longer the same, managing to kill some monsters before walking towards another. After some time, on a giant screen, an interview is shown with the famous S-rank hunters. The three of them are famous for their kindness, and they often do volunteer work. One of them comments that they always felt joy when helping those in need, and that they still feel that way, being the three perpetrators of Ji-hyung. After hearing that response, the presenter talks about a civilian that Taesu injured about 5 years ago due to an accident with an ability. But before continuing, the young man starts crying and comments that she couldn't control his abilities well. Confesses that he wants to apologize to his friend, but he has never been able to communicate with him, and when he said he was sorry, the interview room door flies towards him. With his ability, he manages to defend himself, so he looks to see what is happening. That's when many civilians scream that he is a monster, starting to flee. Meanwhile, the so-called monster walks toward the three boys to launch an attack. But before that fight began, Ji-hyung was in another one some time ago, as he encountered a red portal and started running towards it, eliminating every monster in his path. Returning to the present, Taesu is hit hard in the face, flying far from the attack. This surprises his friends, who can only stare at the monster in front of them. By the way, it tells them that it managed to escape. After saying that, Taesu stands up and asks his friends to eliminate the monster. That's when Pikachu uses his power, delivering an electric attack that at first seems to work, but it clearly enrages Ji-hyung, who with a single move beheads him. His friends witness this and are momentarily speechless. After the head falls, the supposed monster looks at them, and just at that moment, the boy who controls rocks traps him in a stone structure. But obviously, that wouldn't be enough, as Ji-hyung manages to break the structure and grab the young man by the jaw, tearing it off his face with a yank. This makes the young man fall in pain, only to receive the final blow. It is at this moment that Taesu lands a punch on the monster, but that attack was useless, as it only fell moments. Because of this, he prepares multiple diamond spears outside the building and, with a flick of his finger, launches them all at the monster. But after a few seconds of being still, the monster begins to move, and to Taesu's horror, the wounded creature starts pulling out the diamond spears. Faced with this opponent, the young man coats his body in diamond, starting to attack with punches, one after another, ending with his fist in the monster's mouth. But unlike before, this time, the monster manages to break and bite through him, then immediately impaled him. Both exchange looks of fury and fear. And at that moment, Taesu summons a diamond stone impaling the monster who was staring at him. The young man takes advantage of the immobilization to flee, but he doesn't get far as a diamond spear pierces him. It was thrown by Ji-hyung, who, by the way, begins walking toward his assailant while holding multiple diamond spears. The young man screams for him to stay away, but it's useless as the monster punishes him by embedding all of the diamond spears into him. After that, Tae-soo asks who he is and why he's doing this. Upon hearing this, Ji-young grabs half of his face, pulling out the bone that was there, revealing his perpetrator, only to immediately receive his punishment for so many years of suffering, being hit over and over again until Ji-young places his fist in the boy's mouth and he dies. After that, he looks around, revealing that the entire place was destroyed. While gazing at his reflection, he remembers when he came out of the red portal, going to visit his mother. Enraged by the state she ended up in after 5 years, he screams in the rain, trying to drown the. Meanwhile, in another location, more precisely at a portal in the middle of the forest, a group of hunters praises a healer for her good work and asks if it's her first time in a gate. She confirms it and thanks them for watching over her, but then they take a perverse attitude and say that they are the ones who should be grateful. They explain that no one knows what happens inside a gate, beginning to approach the woman, grabbing her and saying they'll take a month to leave, asking her to make the most of that time with them. But before anything happens, the man's head falls off, terrifying everyone. They turn around to see who was there, revealing it to be Ji-hyung. But of course, they don't know that and assume he's another monster, attacking immediately. However, the attack is useless, as it does nothing to the bone monster. Even when someone strikes him with a sword, it shatters in the process, resulting in the loss of the wielder's head. This terrifies the hunters, who believe this monster is too strong. In just a few seconds, they all lose their heads. This is witnessed by the woman, who trembles in fear as the monster approaches her. He examines her closely, something she also does, stopping her tears and thanking him for saving her. Or at least, that's what it seemed, as Ji-hyung cuts her in half. Then we return to the moment when he was screaming to relieve the accumulated pain. At that very moment, someone speaks, saying it was incredible, and asks how he feels after completing his revenge. Ji-hyung asks who she is. The woman introduces herself as the head of the Korean Hunter Association, Lee Yoo-min. He then asks how she knows him, to which the woman replies that she oversees everyone who enters through a red portal and asks if it was 5. Upon hearing those words, Ji-hyung launches an attack while cursing her. However, he stops abruptly when she mentions that she can revive his mother. Diverting his attack and shocked, he asks what she just said. Yoo-min responds that she can awaken her as she is the only S-class healer in the world. Upon hearing this, he asks what he needs to, so she explains that the gates are interconnected, turning them into a passageway that ignores borders. And there are countries that use this fact to wage war on hunters. Peace has been broken and all nations are enemies. However, they lack hunters, so they've been unable to block the invasion of Japanese hunters. Until he returned. She comments that if they respond to Japanese pressure with hunters, it will draw a lot of global attention, so they need his help. She declares that she will bring his mother back, but in exchange, he must become a monster for them. Already elsewhere, more precisely in Japan, in the Prime Minister's office, he speaks with the Defense Minister and asks why all his hunters are untraceable. The one asking is the Japanese Prime Minister, Ryuzaki Ryuto. The Defense Minister apologizes and confesses that it is his fault, saying he will go look for them. He is Ikusai Kageru, Japan's #1 hunter. As he leaves the room, he asks for his sword to be prepared immediately, and his secretary asks if he is going alone, to which then she says she might be rude, but informs him that many elite hunters were sent before, and no one returned, suggesting he go with some support hunters. However, Kageru asks if he needs something like that, to which she apologizes. So, as he is already at the portal, he thinks that hunters are useless and questions if they could have been wiped out by such monsters. Just when some monstrous dogs attack him, but they end up being eliminated. Then the wound hunter sees something. He encounters Ji-hyung, who is sitting on top of a pile of bodies, and that seems to activate the hunter's instincts, moving quickly and attacking Huesos, but he defends himself, surprising the swordsman with the monster's defense. Then he attacks the hunter, who asks if he dares to block his sword while dodging an attack and preparing a skill, the first moon. That strike makes the monster fly, but he is also injured. So the man uses another skill, the second moon, cutting Ji-hyung. And at that moment, Kaguru prepares the final attack, the third moon. But before his attack reached the monster, it counterattacked, getting close to his face. However, he manages to move his sword, cutting off his arm, and finally cuts off his head while stating that his sword can even cut through diamond. After that, he questions if the hunters lost to something like that and says they are pathetic. Ji-hyung, without his head, remembers his father. He was always busy with work, but he was warm and kind, and that was the quality he liked the most. Although, due to his own carelessness, he caused an accident, ending his father's life, considering it was all his fault. After that, his mother's business went down, and they had many debts. He doesn't remember the last time he held his mother's hands, which makes him wonder if she is okay. He didn't sleep at night because he heard his mother crying. He concludes that everything is his fault and that someone like him does not have the right to live. However, when his mother finds him, he informs her that he is a wasn't, as the wound he had before regenerated. Hugging her, he says that he will become a hunter and make her happy. After that, he recalls when Yumin said that the age of peace has ended, with Japan being the greatest enemy. She asks Ji-hyung to become her monster to hunt Japan's strongest. After that flashback, Ji-hyung wakes up and starts regenerating, something Kagero does not notice, as he only mentions that he is going to Korea. Right then, his leg is bitten, surprising him even more when he sees that the monster is regenerating, confirming to himself that he had cut off the head, angering Ji-hyung. He bites harder. That provokes the swordsman to cut off the head again and start activating his skill, only to disappear immediately. Since he was moving at high speed and using the cell, 12th moon, completely slicing the monster. That attack was so strong that the wave of cuts expanded throughout the portal tunnel, reaching its exterior, cutting everything in front. After that attack, Kagero sheaths his sword and says he didn't expect to be bitten in the leg, wanting someone to heal him. But before that happens, a bone pierces his leg, frightening him since the monster is still alive and moving. This makes him angry, drawing his sword and cursing while launching an attack. In a scene change, a woman asks if all these people are really necessary, as not only the Prime Minister, but also multiple elite hunters are present. The young man comments that it has already been 3 days since Kagero entered, and he needs to check what happened to him. But before he says anything else, the swordsman's head comes out of the portal. But most of the monster that was there also comes out. It's then that the Prime Minister orders an attack. But before his voice can give the order, he is cut down. Back at the Korean Hunter Association, someone asks if they really believe he can do it. Yumin replies that they will have to see if he can win against Japan's strongest hunter, revealing to us that Ryuzaki Juto was not cut down and managed to counterattack, causing a great explosion where he struck. Moreover, he is the strongest hunter in Japan, with an SSF. 3 years ago, most of the monsters from normal portals were subjugated. After that, the world began to fear the power of hunters, so some countries tried to eradicate the hunters, but they failed miserably. Because of that, hunters all over the world who saw this either reached an agreement with their nation, coexisted, or they conquered the country by force, each obtaining supremacy in their own way. It is revealed that one of the countries invaded by the hunters was Japan, and the reason was simple. The Prime Minister wasn't his rank hunter. He was aggressive even before awakening, and after the hunter system appeared, he tried to take control of South Korea. However, that ambition was being hindered. because of a monster. The elite awakeners, seeing the monster regenerating, are surprised, and they ask to leave that being with them, and two of them reach to attack. But before they attack, Ji-young grabs the head of one while cutting off the others. Moreover, the one whose head was grabbed was crushed immediately. The other hunters saw this, leaving them impressed, and at the same time angry, since their companions were eliminated. But before they could do anything, the Prime Minister shouts that from now on, he will eliminate anyone who takes a step. This leaves everyone scared. Meanwhile, Ji-young and the Prime Minister exchange glances. It is at that moment that in a memory, a place with snow is revealed, and a man asks a boy what he is doing there. That man was Ryuzaki Judo, and the boy, seeing him, questions who he is. The man doesn't answer that, but says it's cold. Wrapping the boy, he asks him to accompany him. On the way, he asks the boy's name, and looking at him, the boy responds that it is the swordsman who lost his head. That enrages Judo, who, in a few seconds, begins to attack the bone monster. He attacks with fiery fists, managing to make a hole in the monster's chest, causing it to fall in pain. After that, the man gathers fire energy in his mouth, releasing it on the monster, completely melting it. This was witnessed by the other hunters, who were astonished, as it was something they expected from the Prime Minister, who, by the way, was watching the melted bones. It is then that he goes to grab his friend's head, but then he notices something, and it's the bone monster, which was rising from the fire, regenerating every part that had melted before. Ryuzaki Judo, seeing this, has another memory of when they eliminated all the resistance, and he apologizes for having forced his protege to do these things, to which he responds that it's okay. The man, with a determined look, says that they have just conquered Japan, and now they will take South Korea and China. He warns the boy that they could die the next time they fight a group, and if he wants, he can stop following him. However, the young man says that it was him who took him in when he was about to sleep forever on the street, and for that, he will be in his debt for the rest of his life. But he wishes to ask something, and that is, when all this is over, to be given permission to call him father. The man replies that he is close-minded, and adds that even without asking, he already is his son. Returning to the present, the battlefield has changed, and right at that moment, a girl with ice abilities freezes the lava that was around. Then she looks at the fight between the two monsters. Bones takes a few steps back, and that's when a volcano explodes. So Yuto reveals a complete transformation of his body, which was wrapped in magma and fire, and immediately hurls magma at the monster, starting to melt. Just at the moment, he jumps to attack the man, but before reaching him, he is thrown far away by a pillar of fire used by Yuto, sending him to the mouth of the volcano, which also explodes, toasting him even more. Everyone was looking at the volcano, revealing that it was so large it could be seen from far away. After that, Juto looks at his adversary, who was sinking his bones into the lava. It is at that moment that he calls Hanami, and she appears before him. The man asks for her hand, then she removes the glove, beginning to freeze where she touched, extending the freezing to the volcano, cooling the lava. Before leaving, Juto says that he will melt there forever, showing us that Ji-young's hand was trapped, leaving his body heated in magma. Changing location, in South Korea, at the Kyeumkang Guild, something seems to be happening, and a woman was healing someone, revealing to us that the Diamond Youth is being healed. Opening his eyes at the volcano, Juto mentions that only a minimal number of people will stay behind, and the rest will return, which everyone confirms. Meanwhile, on Ji-young's side, he reflects on how horrible it is, moving his hand and hitting the ice. He knows that the lava is like the one inside, recalling that in a lava pit, surrounded by monsters, a skeletal hand emerges, and it's Ji-young, revealing that this is something he has experienced tens of thousands of times. Now, in the present, under the lava, he forces himself forward, breaking his bone and freeing himself. He reflects that even after experiencing it multiple times, the pain never lessens. He screams under the lava. Then, he places his leg on the hardened lava and pushes away. gaining enough momentum to crash into the Tristan and free himself. The girl catches Yuto's attention, and he asks her to gather the hunters and hide. Immediately, he jumps towards the hardened crust. The girl can do only watch. Recalling when she asked if he wasn't exaggerating, saying that magma regeneration isn't omnipotent, he then responds that among the 4 great hunter nations, United States, China, Russia, and Japan, they are the weakest. And if they can't absorb South Korea, there won't be another way for them to survive. Then Hanami approaches and says that many of her hunters will also die, but he argues that he can fight more, even if his body is destroyed. He will protect his country, transforming and sending Bones far away. Then he immediately jumps towards him, hitting him and embedding him in the wall. Right after, he grabs him and throws him far, but Bones manages to. However, Yuto prepares a fire attack, shooting it at the monster, which tried to protect itself. Unfortunately, its bones melt. To finish the combo, the man jumps, falling like a meteor onto Ji-young, triggering the volcano. Haname tells the other hunters that the Prime Minister ordered them to evacuate and that she will stay behind, ordering everyone, but someone apologizes and says that everyone has received help from the Prime Minister. In the end, everyone declares they will protect Ryuzaki Ju, who by the way was dragging the monster deep into the volcano, tearing it apart until there was nothing left. Juto remains motionless for a few seconds, while the other hunters wait. However, Ji-young begins to regenerate over the man, heading toward the surface. He saw it, but it was too late, as the monster managed to fully emerge, enraging him. But before he noticed, the monster heads towards Hanami, grabbing her by the arm and dragging her into the volcano, freezing the monster in the process. However, as mentioned before, the Prime Minister didn't see it coming. At that moment, he emerges with an ability already prepared, while the other hunters chase the monster in an attempt to rescue Hanami. Everything seemed to end there, but Yuto bit his lip to hold back the attack, and with his arm, he manages to cut the monster and free his wife. Unfortunately, the monster takes advantage of the distraction, and all the hunters prepared their attacks, and Hanami managed to touch the skeletal hand, freezing it completely and receiving the attack. It shattered it entirely. In a rush to see if she is okay, they throw the frozen remains into the lava, but the woman is unable to speak as she sees her beloved's lifeless body approaching. She notices that the head was frozen. This leaves everyone upset, but with no time to process such a feeling, as they hear something, and it's the monster regenerating and starting to walk toward them. The woman is in tears, and Ji-young is in front of her, fainting from everything that's happening. Then she begins to dream. He says it's okay and that he's there, kissing her. But in that beautiful moment, the woman opens her eyes, seeing her beloved's head frozen, and waking up to reality, seeing that all the hunters she had were eliminated. She can only look at him, then divert her gaze to her hands, and with the touch of her palm, she freezes herself, ending her life in front of. After all that, Bones returns to the portal. The scene changes to South Korea, more precisely, to the Kayum-kan Guild, in a mana stone storage room, where a woman tells Taisu that he can't overexert himself, that he was the only one left with mana, and that's why they managed to save him, but his friends weren't as lucky. The girl asks for the reason, and he replies that the boy he used to play with in his youth escaped from the Blood Gate and eliminated him. While recalling his face, he curses him, calling him a bastard. At that moment, he removes his outfit, revealing himself as the guild master and his S-rank Connor Hanteso, whose sword is Manhwa. Immediately after, he orders that the seal be. After a long process, the girl manages to break the seal. After that, the young man asks to gather all the members of the Kayum-kan Guild. One of the members bows, saying he is at his service, while some question whether the master had not died. But it is then explained that the vice master of the guild revived him. The Vice Master informs that the monster has moved to the gate after the massacre in Japan. Additionally, he talks about the meaning of eliminating everyone. It is obvious since he wants to eliminate the monster. Upon hearing that, the Vice Master states that his intelligence team has sworn under penalty of death that they will be of great help. But soon after saying that, he loses his head. That scene is witnessed by his team as Tae-soo absorbs his power. One of the boys calls for his master, and he responds that the guy he has now was originally the vice president of the Korean Hunters Association. Since he absorbed the association 3 years ago, the Kyumkan Guild has been able to dominate Korea. He adds that this guy's ability is S-rank telekinesis. Activating that ability, he eliminates the person who called him, exploding and causing a red rain. Before all of that happens, the woman by his side asks if he really wants to remove the seal, explaining that his ability is cursed. But in the present, Tae-soo thinks that's not the case, that his ability is the best. He then asks the others if they want to be of help. That causes the Kyumkan Guild to be completely annihilated that day. It is revealed that Tae-soo was the cause of all of this since he was absorbing the abilities of the members. The woman who removed the valet asks if he is okay, to which he responds no, and that the monster eliminated the S-rank prime minister, considering that it's still not enough power. He thinks about eliminating the worm at all costs, but then refines that idea, calling it by its name, Kang Ji-hyung. At the same time, he declares, in another location, Lee Yumin stands before a portal from which Husos emerges. She welcomes him. At the Korean Hunters Association building, Yumin reflects that the healing process has begun immediately, explaining that her S-rank healing restores the damaged cells one by one using her mana. Ji-hyung knows it will take time, but she can definitely save her. He carefully observes the treatment of his mother. After some time, Yumin leaves and mentions that if she does this every day, his mother will wake up next week. Collapsing immediately due to forcing her ability, Ji-hyung, seeing her, comments that it seems to cost an extraordinary amount of mana. He asks why she goes so far to do this. She grabs his hand and responds that she does it because he has to survive. Activating his ability, that scares Husos, who immediately pulls his hand away. Yumin says it was as she expected, that his beastification process has progressed inside the Blood Gate. She explains that since the gate first appeared 15 years ago, all the other gates have slowly turned them into blood gates. However, since Ji-hyung escaped from one, the change has accelerated, and as a result, all the gates in the world are becoming blood gates. She adds that the mana flowing from them is giving him strength. She further explains, in terms of mana flow, that if a normal gate is a hole, a blood gate is a passage. This means it's connected to somewhere, and something is passing through it, and that something is searching for him. Revealing that multiple monsters will start emerging from the red gates. This will cause a wave of destruction in the cities where they appear, making civilians flee and wonder what these things are. In a scene change, in the office of the President of South Korea, which is protected by a barrier, someone shouts, questioning what is happening. They ask why the Kyumkan Guild isn't responding. That's when another man repeats that it's because the guild has been annihilated, leaving the questioner speechless. Faced with this situation, the man who seems to be the secretary asks what they should do and suggests it might be wise to seek help from abroad. However, the man who appears to be the president rejects that option, arguing it would be equivalent to self-destruction. He quickly adds that they will first declare martial law, something his secretary seems to doubt, as the army won't be effective against the Maters. This angers the president since there is no other option and they must do something. He adds that the Kyumkan Guild isn't all they have, as Korea's second-ranked guild, Dosa, Korea's third-ranked guild, Vino, the fourth-ranked, the Yonghak Guild. However, all those guilds were defeated by a beast that emerged from a red portal. Ji-hyung witnessed it all, wondering if it was all his fault. Lee Yumin doesn't confirm, but questions what he will do now. At that moment, a girl falls in the middle of the street, nearly crushed But luckily, Husos appears and he cuts the monster in half. Reflecting that when he died inside the Red Gate, Amana tried to turn him into a monster, but he managed to endure, which is why he obtained an abnormal regeneration ability. Or at least, that's what he thought, but it turns out that wasn't the case. He knows that the mana won't let him go until it turns him into a complete monster. However, he reflects that he's finally trying to live a peaceful life after his mother is treated. However, in the present, he's fighting and shouts why they can't leave him alone as he eliminates a monster. Nevertheless, he was being watched, and someone asks if it's him, that someone is a bone monster sitting in a creepy chair, who, by the way, questions whether it was him who caused the crack. Ji-hyung says he will eliminate all the monsters and asks her to keep healing his mother in a safe place. Yumin understands his plan and says she will continue healing her from the association's underground bunker. Meanwhile, she mentally urges him to fight hard for Ji-hyung reflects that these monsters are familiar, noticing that they are the friends he fought continuously for 5 years inside the Blood Gate. He knows that after a certain amount, the monsters stop coming out. Moreover, he eliminated all those around, and if he deals with all of them, he can live happily with. But suddenly, he receives a bullet in the head. When he turns around, he notices it's the army. One of the soldiers says he only eliminated monsters, but another responds that it doesn't matter, saying he is the cause of this situation and they will contain him until hunter support arrives. This surprises Ji-hyung a bit. However, he had no time to think as a tank fires, and not just one, but several. This impacts Ji-hyung hard. Mentally, he screams in pain, and in that moment of agony, he begins to lose his vision. When he regains it, he is in front of a red door, which incidentally began reacting to his presence. He remembers when Yumin told him to be careful, as near a blood gate, it will be hard to suppress monstrification. Right there, he sees something and has a memory of suffering from the attack of his perpetrators, while a blonde boy punted him. At another time, that boy complains that Han Tae-soo is a bastard and asks why only him, to which Ji-hyung responds that he is an easy target. He adds that at this rate, he will also get hurt and asks him not to pretend to know him at school. This seems to annoy the boy, who then grabs him by the shirt and questions if he's crazy, but the young man just averts his gaze, which makes the boy let go. Ji-hyung reflects that yes, his childhood friend left, or at least he thought so, but he was gathering evidence. Since he has the ability to record everything he sees with his right eye, he sent this evidence to the police, the education office, and news agencies. But the next day, after all that, he was discovered and his right eye was taken out. The young man apologizes to Kang Ji-hyung, who is angry about what happened to him. Then the young man says he doesn't think he can keep going to school with him. Ji-hyung says that was Tae-soo's doing, and that he will make sure. But before finishing what he was going to say, his friend grabs him by the shoulder, trembling and begging him never to do that. Ji-hyung dries his tears and asks what he will do now, as he has lost his ability. Then the blonde boy asks him not to worry and with enthusiasm confirms there is much to live for and that he will join the army. In the next scene, the blonde's head is revealed on the bone spear Ji-hyung holds in his bones. He can only scream and cry for what he did. But again, there is no time to suffer, as more immediately, some monsters go on the attack, which makes Ji-hyung react and return to eliminate them. On the other hand, in the president's building, he asks what that is, and his secretary explains it's the monster that eliminated the Kyumkang Guild and the Japanese Prime Minister. Also, that he was the one who caused the portal collapse, and according to their investigations, they need to eliminate him to return the gates to normal. The president asks why they are fighting each other, and his secretary replies that he doesn't know, but highlights that the important thing is that not even the other monster. He adds that the blood gate is spreading abroad and they cannot delay any longer. The president asks about the domestic hunters, but his assistant responds that all have been annihilated. This worries the man, and in the end, he asks them to contact the foreign hunter's office. It's then that we see someone asking if the monster that eliminated many in Korea and Japan caused the Bloodgate, slamming his spear into the ground and saying that this will be interesting. He is Lun Zhuguang, China's #1. Elsewhere, a woman complains about something she sees. She is Russia's #1 ranked hunter, Vladimir Rusana. And lastly, a man in tears says he can hear the screams of those who suffer and states he must go. The other being, who seems to be his assistant, comments that if he goes, something will. Then he says the war is over, using an ability and destroying everything there. He is Stephen Lucas, America's #1 hunter, and announces they are now gunning to Korea. 5 years fighting against the creature in the blood dimension. A place with an extreme environment where food and sleep have been suppressed. Only repeated fights for survival. And extreme exhaustion. Ji-hyung reveals that each time he lost his mind, his transformation into a monster progressed. However, in those moments, he always remembered his mother's, who was in a vegetative state, and the despicable being who turned her into that. By the way, that last one made him wake up with rage, managing to suppress the monster transformation, but he wonders why he is now about to lose control. He reflects that maybe his determination weakens after achieving revenge, but then changes his mind, considering that the magical power of the blood dimension has increased and that if he approaches, he can't suppress it. Because of this, he ended up killing innocent people. And while avoiding the portals, he can continue eliminating all the creatures. But even so, he wonders if with that, he can atone for his sins. Right at that moment, he is attacked. His head explodes from an attack. He looks at who did it as his opponent prepares another attack. On the other hand, when the portal appeared, it was Christmas. A priest was saying that with the arrival of Christmas, one should show gratitude. But unfortunately, a massive appearance of portals emerged. At the beginning, there were no hunters, and people could only flee. The pastor shouted for everyone to leave quickly. His assistant told him to evacuate as well, but the man replied, first. Right at that moment, a monster noticed him, heading towards him, but something happened. A light illuminated everything, at the same time eliminating the monster. The pastor asks if this is God's will. Leaving from there, and a new being awakened. It is explained that the largest church in the United States gathers 100,000 followers, 138, and there were no deaths. This was the appearance of the SSS level hero, first in the world who saved all of the United States. Since he was young, Ji-hyung respected him deeply. The #1 hero in the United States, Stephen Lucas. He wonders why he came to Korea, but Lucas doesn't give him time to think, as he is soon attacked and severely injured. The man confesses that the creature doesn't die easily. At that moment, Ji-hyung started regenerating. Then the man uses an ability, restricting Ji-hyung's mobility, who starts to approach a red portal, but he manages to throw himself forward, landing outside the red portal. Lucas prepared another attack. Just then, Ji-hyung says he's not a creature. The man halts his attack and asks if he is human. Then the young man asks as a favor for him to listen to his story. After explaining everything, Lucas understands the situation, embracing Ji-hyung while asking if it has been very difficult. He asks what his name is, and the young man replies that his name is Kang. Then Lucas says he fights to save human beings, but today he killed too many people. So as not to forget them and to atone for his sins, he starts to tearing his clothes and reveals that he has tattooed all of them on his body. He tells Kang Ji-hyung that he can help him eliminate all the creatures, but he also explains that this whole situation with the red portals will spread worldwide and many people will perish. Then he apologizes while writing Kang Ji-hyung's name, who observed all of this. Finally, he strikes the boy on the head while using his ability. He confesses that he really has to eliminate it. On the other hand, in the Hunters Association, Yumin was watching all this while healing Ji-hyung's mother. And apparently, that was encouraging the woman. In another place, someone complains about Lucas, calling him crazy since he went to Korea alone after devastating the war. She wonders if he was holding back power all this time. Then she is informed that her army lost 80% of its energy and that they can't hold the defense line. He adds that if they continue like this, the hunters will return to Earth and they need help. But just then, communication is cut. Luzana complains about this and adds that things would be different if she could capture the Arctic creature. Then someone arrives, announcing that the creature will be captured by him. Han arrives, announcing the Arctic monster. It was the first SSS-class monster. When it appeared, it destroyed the entire Russian Arctic base with a single attack. The Russian government, unaware of magical beasts and portals, mobilized all its forces, but they failed to exterminate it. In the end, they ended up using half of the nation's nuclear arsenal. However, monsters did not die from non-magical attacks, making the nuclear bomb useless. And to make matters worse, northern Russia became a land of monsters due to radioactive. After that, Russia declared war on the United States to claim resources. In the present, the young man announces he will eliminate that monster, to which the Russian hunter asks if he is a Korean S-rank hunter, then laughs, saying it's incredible. She mentions that he came here without permission, but for what? She questions if an S-rank thinks he can defeat the Arctic monster, adding if he wanted to die now. Then she uses an ability that exerts pressure where Taesu is, breaking the entire floor in that area. After that, he asks if she is here because of that monster and says he even heard that the United States defeated her, which angers the woman even more. However, the crazed young man says he can hunt it, so the Russian asks if he thinks he can make it through the radiation to reach the monster in question. He responds that he can. Then she sees he has a shield, but warns him that it won't withstand the high-level radiation. Then he begins to activate other abilities, covering his entire body with defensive powers. Seeing this, the woman says that even if he eliminates the Arctic monster, she will only give him 30% of the mana stone, not half. But he tells her to. Meanwhile, Ji-hyung begins to shine from the inside out, and the hunter says he's truly sorry, as he has to eliminate it. This attack causes the young man's body to turn to dust, disappearing completely as it is carried away by the breeze. However, from the dust, an eye begins to form, followed by a face, and finally a bone. Seeing what happened, Ji-hyung reflects that he's no match and wonders what he should do. Then he throws himself into the attack, trying to strike it in the face, embedding his bone between the hunter's eyebrows. But it was useless, as the purple being embraces him and once again apologizes. He adds that Ji-hyung is free to hurt him as much as he wants, as if that helps heal his heart. And again, Ji-hyung's body begins to turn to dust. And again, he begins to regenerate, something Lucas notices and asks if that ability is unlimited. And again, he embraces him, saying he'll keep eliminating him painlessly. The young man can only curse, remembering that his ability is exoskeleton manifestation, and he can cover his skin with an exoskeleton, but it comes with unbearable pain, and that it hurts a lot. He reveals that unbearable pain accompanied each time his body regenerated. But he managed to endure it, all for revenge and hope. However, Lucas's lethal attacks repeated immediately after he regenerated. This completely surpassed all the pain he had endured. This was repeated numerous times, causing him to surpass his limit. That's when he remembers something. Back in high school, someone asks him what he's looking at, and a young Ji-hyung responds that he's watching Lucas's video. This boy says that ability is too powerful and then asks what his own ability is, to which Ji-hyung replies that he has an exoskeleton. This scares the boy, who curses him for throwing him to the floor. He says it's disgusting and reveals himself to be. In the present, Ji-hyung wonders why he has to feel this pain, recalling everything that's happened to him. He mentally shouts, asking what he did wrong. Now in his subconscious, or at least I think that's where he is, a young Ji-hyung asks them to stop and admits Lucas was right. He explains that if they survive, people would die. But he also mentions that even if they die, his mother will survive. And he But the young man's response was somewhat disconcerting. In Lucas's arms, he begins to absorb energy from the red portals, and the man notices it. In the next moment, the young man prepares his fist charged with that energy, punching him and releasing all the accumulated power. Lucas sees the punch hit, but more people are watching as a drone is broadcasting the fight. One of these broadcasts plays on a giant screen, which the entire population watches, including Lucas's son. Meanwhile, the building where Yumin is starts collapsing. Noticing this, her secretary calls out to the president, who is still healing the young man's mother. The secretary says she's pushing herself too hard, and because of that, Yumin collapses. Falling to the ground and coughing up blood, her secretary rushes to her aid, but the hunter says the healing is complete. That's when Ji-young's mother wakes up. Somewhere in Russia, Tasao curses Kang Ji-young as he watches the toxic cloud, remembering the moment he saw him fight Lucas. He gets angry remembering that, but quickly changes his mind as he stands before a massive monster and remarks that it will be fun to face it. Meanwhile, in the fight between Kang Ji-young and Lucas, the young man shows a new appearance, now looking more monstrous. Lucas, seeing him, comments that he possesses an ominous, magical power. They appear in front of him, and he embraces him, saying he must be deeply tormented. Before the monster is evaporated, he manages to free his armed arm with a bone blade and launches a fatal attack on Lucas, who, as if by magic, disappears after being struck. Afterward, Lucas comments that sometimes just having someone to listen can make a big difference. Then, the hunter appears over the monster, embedding his hand in its head. However, Bones suddenly turns, hitting Lucas and separating his hand from his body, throwing him far away. Lucas gets up and observes Kang Ji-young, whose head glows due to the hunter's hand. So the monster decides to grab his skull with both hands and, with great force, splits his head in half. All this happens under the gaze of the man, who is already regenerating his lost hand. He also comments that, since he obtained that power, he began to hear voices constantly. The voices of those who suffer from hunger, disease, and disasters. But also those of people seeking. He reveals that fortunately, he also hears other sounds, those of encouragement, hope, happiness, and gratitude, the bright voices of those he has thwarted. And even now, he can hear them clearly. Just at that moment, Bones launches an attack, but Lucas, kneeling on the ground, materializes huge hands beside the monster. And by bringing them together, he crushes it, causing an explosion of rare red light. However, something starts to happen. A dark energy begins to be absorbed from the freshly crushed being. He breaks free and, stirring at his target, leaps to attack, intending to stab him with his blade. But Lucas dodges Kang Ji-young's attack, who asks how that's possible. When the monster attacks again, Lucas wonders if that's the only way. Touching his opponent's forehead, it causes the monster to stop moving, and Lucas states that sometimes faith tests them. Then he begins to control Bones' movements, making him stab his own hands into his chest, hurting himself repeatedly. Lucas's ability forces his opponent to move against his will and even mirrors his actions. At that moment, the man begins to recite his prayers while forcing Kang Ji-young to hurt himself over and over. He reflects on everything that's happening and wonders what he's doing, admitting that it hurts a lot. However, at the same time, he can't stop praising. He expresses that it feels warm. After suffering a bit more, he wonders if that's what respect, faith, represents. Then, he curses all of them. His face reflects anger and anguish over what he's experiencing. All this is observed by the entire world, except for Tae-soo, who is fighting against the Arctic monster. He comments that this beast is very strong. However, he thinks the Arctic monster is nothing compared to the Americans. And that, if he can't eliminate it, he also won't be able to eliminate Kang Ji. He reflects that he must finish him off with his own hands. On the other hand, Lucas is kneeling in front of a pool of red liquid. It's then that lightning begins to emerge from the portals and strike the red pool, quickly regenerating bones and trying to catch Lucas. But he is quick, and grabbing part of the monster, he throws it directly against the building. The structure collapses, and debris falls on him, leaving Kang Ji-young in the sewers in front of a woman, who, by the way, asks him if he is her son. The woman, upon seeing the supposed monster on the ground, asks if it is her son. He, upon seeing her, gets emotional and calls her mom. But the woman changes her expression, terrified by what she sees, and recalls the moment she found him been injured. At that moment, she was surprised. But when he mentions that he is an awakened, she hugs him while he says he wants to become a hunter to give her a good life. The woman secretly was nervous and somewhat scared. In the present, the young man crawls toward the woman while calling her mom. This frightens her and she begins to flee. The supposed monster screams that it is him, that he is her son, Kang Ji, struggling to reach her so he can grab her arm. This causes the woman to fall, and the boy asks if she does not recognize him by the bone armor. It is then that he decides to take off the armor, starting to remove the bones that formed it, which, by the way, were fused with his skin. However, the woman asks him to stay away, revealing that he had injured himself on purpose to prove he was her son. It is then that Lucas arrives and asks if his mother's story was all a lie. At that moment, he raises the Bible while activating his power. He screams that this is blasphemy and is just about to attack them both. Ji-hyun cuts off his head in a single movement. The head flies far away, and from it emerges a smoke that advances toward the young man and enters his body through his mouth. In the brief silence that follows, something strange begins to happen to Ji-hyun. Out of nowhere, he completely changes his personality and, staring into the void, says in a sweet tone, "Mom, I'm your good." In another time and place, a woman reflects that she likes strong men and despises the weak. As an example, she remembers those who couldn't endure her whims and left her. That's why she loves Lucas. She repeatedly says how much she likes him, wishing to be one with him. Shortly after, she awakens her abilities, heading to the church and thus entering the hunter's body, becoming one with her host. In the present, that's her motto, take what you desire, and that there will always be a man stronger than Lucas. It's the best. But then she begins to perceive something and realizes they are her host's memories. In the past, Ji-hyun wakes up and, approaching his mother, asks where she's going. Upon hearing him, the woman begins to run, or rather flee from him, under the rain. Her son, desperate, tries to follow her, but sadly slips in the water and falls face first to the ground. He screams, begging her. The woman gives him one last look before continuing to flee. Then, under the rain, the boy keeps moving until he collapses on the ground, pleading with her not to leave. He begs her to stay with him, reminding her that he's her son, and wonders why she's leaving him. He questions whether she's leaving because he's to blame for his father's death, or perhaps because his parents are disgusting. Or maybe because he's a monster. It's then that he fixes his gaze on a broken bottle. And apparently, he makes it, ready to start hurting himself, something he does. Over and over again, he kept hurting himself, unable to stop. He kept telling himself he could do it, cheering himself on while shouting his name. That's when his mother found him after returning. The young man, filled with guilt, apologized to her, confessing that he couldn't get rid of it as it kept growing, showing her his arm, wrapped in a layer of. While his mother looked at him horrified, he asked what he should do. Moved, she hugged him and apologized to him. In the present, the woman who had possessed him with her ability was awakening in the boy's subconscious. She reflected on what had happened and concluded the mood was crazy. However, she accepted this reality, thinking that with that body, she would be free. She began to move freely, but suddenly felt something strange and started writhing. She screamed that it was a curse, that the pain was unbearable. She felt how parts of the exoskeleton had embedded into her organs, how her muscles were twisted, and, to top it off, part of her intestine was torn. Despite the pain, she told herself she would heal and force him to do it. What she didn't know was that healing hurt. She feels that every second hurts and wonders why this is happening. Then he tells her to leave, revealing that, in reality, the woman is trapped in the palm of his hand, inside his subconscious. After that, the woman immediately begins to move to leave the boy's body. Once outside, she asks for a moment to wait. However, before she can say anything else, she is cut in half. After doing so, the young man begins walking toward his mother, unaware that Lucas's head starts to glow. In a flashback, Lucas shouts for everyone to leave the place and use the doors. His assistant begs him to evacuate as well, but the priest insists that it was at that moment when a monster was about to attack them. But before that could happen, Lucas receives his awakened powers. Additionally, he has a vision of the future, the past, and the universe. Something akin to a cosmic message sends him images of everything, while nothing seems to make sense. In another moment, the man falls to his knees and reflects, "If this is your will, if it truly is your will, then I will gladly accept it." In the present, a glow begins to emanate from Lucas's neck, causing his head to reattach to his body. The young man cannot believe it, even more so when he sees Lucas's newfound, radiating power and strength. The man addresses the celestial god and declares that he will wholeheartedly accept the trials given. However, he asks why such terrible trials were given to the child. While holding him, he begins to shine. That simple act causes the bones covering the boy to fall to the ground, restoring his original body without any. At that very moment, a monster emerges from the ground beneath them, ready to devour them. However, Lucas activates his power, not only beginning to shine, but also summoning a light descending from the sky, splitting the monster in two. That same light spreads across the terrain, revealing that the entire city was infested with. Nevertheless, that was not the most important thing. Lucas immediately takes the child in his arms and carries him to the top of a building. After leaving him there, he begins to fly toward the light, all under the child's astonishment. The man who was once his enemy begins to transform, becoming a celestial knight of light. But Lucas was not alone. Suddenly, the sky begins to glow, and more light warriors emerge from it, mounted on winged horses, flying directly toward the monsters invading the city. Then, a fierce battle ensues between the monsters and the Knights of Light. Before the monsters can react, the soldiers of light launch attacks descending like a pelleting flame, obliterating the creatures. All of this was observed by the boy, who was kneeling, astonished by everything that was happening. But this miracle was not happening only in Korea. In many parts of the world, people were being helped by the Knights of Light, even those who did not deserve it. After that, Lucas's son was crying, remembering when he asked his father in front of the church not to go to pray that day. The man, hearing this request, looked at his descendant, who cried while pleading, "Please." The man, still silent, knelt beside him and responded that his father would eventually have to leave his side, so that when that moment came, he must learn to stand alone. Now in the present, Lucas speaks to Kang Ji-hyun, warning him that a heavy fate awaits, that he will experience more and more pain than he has endured thus far. It will be terrible and cruel, but he asks him to still keep his faith until the end. Starting to fade into the air, Lucas reflects on all the tears he has shed up until that moment. He remembers being at the hospital with his wife, while his son cried inconsolably. Despite the sadness, his wife had a peaceful smile. Finally, Lucas exhales his last breath and vanishes from the face of the. Somehow, his son senses it. Looking up at the sky, he bids farewell to his father with a mix of sadness and resignation. On the other hand, Tasao shows a sinister smile, which quickly turns into uncontrolled laughter. Amid his laughter, he shouts that he was on the brink of death, while voraciously absorbing the power of the defeated. Taisu celebrates being alive, as he was close to dying. He laughs like crazy as he begins to absorb the monster. At one point, the boy remembers a scene from his childhood. specifically when he was talking to his brother. On that occasion, he asks if he really has to do it. His brother replies that the stronger he becomes, the more the guild will grow, and that it's all for their father's sake. However, the boy tries to refuse, but it's useless, as his older brother orders him to do it. Then, the brother uses an ability that creates a leash around the boy, forcing him to obey. Little Tae-soo starts coughing while repeating that he doesn't want to do it, begging to be left alone, pleading not to have to go on. At that moment, it is revealed that the boy activated his abilities, generating diamond stakes that seemed to be aimed at eliminating some people who were trapped. Back in the present, the young man curses that memory. On the other hand, the Russian woman mentions that even Lucas helped and comments that she can't believe they managed to get rid. She praises him, saying it's impressive, just as Tae-soo appears. She reminds him that, as she promised, she will give him half of the mana stone from the Arctic beast. However, Tae-soo responds that he consumed it entirely, leaving the woman doubtful about what he said. Tae-soo repeats that he fully absorbed the mana stone. This leaves the Russian woman incredulous, as she states that his body shouldn't be able to withstand. It is then that he launches an attack, but before reaching her, she uses her ability and asks him why. Why did he do such a thing? The boy responds that there is someone he desperately wants. Suddenly, a copy of Tae-soo appears behind her as if it were a ghost, passing through the chair and asking her if she too could die. However, the woman moves a finger, causing Tae-soo's copy to explode. At that moment, Vladimir Luzana comments that with that mana stone, they could have strengthened Russia's hunters up to tenfold, but Tae-soo wasted it for an absurd reason. Then, the woman removes the hat she was wearing and asks if he doesn't want to fight for Russia, revealing a large wound on her head. Before he can respond, multiple copies of Tae-soo launch into the attack. However, it doesn't work, as with a simple gesture, the woman makes all the copies explode, splashing Tae-soo's companion with red liquid. This is how Luzana understands his answer, while the young man uses an ability on his companion, then throws her away from the Russian woman. Immediately afterward, the woman moves a finger and declares that he will now be. That simple gesture causes stones to move toward the young man's companion. However, before they reach her, Tae-soo uses his copies to create a barrier and protect her. Then, he begins to lose control while activating all the abilities he had stolen and attacking Luzana from every angle with different powers, using his copies. Nevertheless, before all those attacks reach her, the woman snaps her fingers. That simple gesture was enough for all the cones and the powers that were about to be launched to explode. The attack was so devastating that it looked like fireworks, when in reality, it was Tae-soo's clones exploding. However, the main body was still in front of her, but not for long, as shortly after, the woman created a mini black hole in the sky, starting to absorb everything, including the young. Before being absorbed by the hole, he remembered a moment from his childhood when he confessed to Yeju that he had eliminated someone that day. He added that no one should take another person's life, and his friend called out to him just as he went down the slide. As he slid down, the boy screamed that he didn't want to kill anyone, repeating it as he slid faster and faster. Back in the present, he screamed that he didn't want to be eliminated. However, it was revealed that there were multiple versions of Tae-soo, all screaming the same thing, that they didn't want to die as they were absorbed by the black. Finally, it was shown that the original Tae-soo had created millions of clones to be absorbed, forming a slide with them. This allowed him to fall in the direction of the Russian woman while shouting that he was going to eliminate her. On the other hand, after Lucas disappears, Kang Ji-hyung lowers his head and begins to cry, revealing that he seems to be sad about what happened. However, something doesn't quite fit as he smiles and wonders what nonsense he was saying. He reflects on what could be so terrible and so cruel. Finally, he concludes that his body has returned to normal, so everything is resolved. He adds that now he can go see his mother, that now he can be happy with her. Too bad someone crushes him before he can do anything. The man who crushes him observes something with doubt and asks what that thing he just. Before the battle between Tae-soo and Rusana in the Russian president's office, some years in the past, the president comments on a monster that remained unharmed even after a nuclear attack. mentioning it was like witnessing the beginning of this end of the world. He is on the ground, surrendered to the hands of fate. It is then that someone calls out. It is a younger version of Vladimira Rusana, the former Russian Minister of Defense, who informs that if they have enough mana, they can eliminate the monster. She adds that they only need to gather awakened individuals. However, the president responds that it is already too late and reveals he has launched the remaining missiles to various parts of the world. Screaming, he declares that now they will all die together. At that moment, a rain of missiles appears above them, heading toward various locations. The woman, seeing this, begins to fly toward the missiles, reaching space. There, she uses her power to catch them, gathering them all into a giant hand of energy. However, the missiles explode, generating a shockwave that reaches Earth, right where the Russian president is. After that, Rusana returns to the president's office. Slightly injured, she observes the deplorable state of the president, who, in a desperate gesture, begs for help, something the woman seems inclined to do, as, trembling, she apologizes to the president. However, she then corrects herself and apologizes to her father, activating her power and causing him to After that, a message arrives at the president's office, informing them that Russia's indiscriminate missile launches have been confirmed. Because of this, the United States announces they will eliminate Russia immediately for the sake of world peace. This surprises the woman, who screams for them not to do it. She informs them that she is the Russian Minister of Defense and announces that the president is dead and that they, but the man who appears to be the president of the United States tells them to go to hell. The already critical situation worsens as the Russian woman's children arrive at the location where she is. She immediately tells them she had warned them not to come because they could be dangerous. Despite this, the little ones run to hug her, leaving her stunned. After that emotional moment, she calls her children by their names, Medvedev and Alyssa, kneeling. She tells them she will definitely protect them. Then, she embraces them as a sign of comfort. Back in the present, she reflects on the promise she made to her son and daughter. She asks Taesu if he really believes that he can lose to someone like him. She activates in her power, but nothing happens. This is because she was eliminated by Taesu even before the entire previous battle took place. It is revealed that he was leaving the area while absorbing the woman's powers. Elsewhere, in the district of awakened Russian residents, Rusana's children asked if they would be safe from American hunters. A lady confirmed they would and added that they would win and return soon. This encouraged the children, who said they were also awakened and assured they could fight. The woman tells Medvedev and Alyssa that everything will be fine, that the queen will protect them. Or at least, that was what she was about to say, as at that moment, she explodes before the girls. It is revealed that the entire residential area was destroyed. In front of the girl was Taesu. The little one displayed the look of terror at the imposing figure of the young man, who showed a trace of emotion. As Taesu walks away, the girl remains in shock, watching him as he fades into the distance. Before leaving completely, Taesu recalls the face of Kang Ji-hyung, stops, and after a brief pause, shakes his head. He activates his power, and the girl explodes. On the other hand, the man who landed on Kang Ji-hyung shows confusion and asks what is happening. Meanwhile, the boy begins to regenerate. It is then that the man kicks him, throwing him off the building. The young man tries to crawl, desperately calling out to his mother, but is crushed again. Despite everything, he continues regenerating and crawling on the ground, repeating the call for his mother. However, the man crushes his head once more, laughing and commenting that he finds it amusing. This cycle repeats several times. The man notices something peculiar about the young man and mentions that he has a strange rhythm, like the sound of a cicada. Then, mocking, he asks why an adult would. Enraged upon hearing those words, Kang Ji-hyung yells at the man, questioning him if he also has a mother, and curses him amidst. The man, ignoring the young man's words, kicks him forcefully, pulling him toward the red portal. This takes him back to the place he once fought to escape from. Before all that happened with Kang Ji-hyung, let's go back a bit to focus on his mother. Right at the moment, she wakes up. Someone asks if she is already conscious, and it is Lee Yumin who wants to know. The boy's mother asks where she is. and the curator responds that she's in the Hunters Association, informing her that they must evacuate first. It is then decided to move to the annex bunker beneath the building. However, during the journey, a hallway collapse separates the women. It is at that moment when Ji-hyung finds his mother. After the encounter, and the woman fainting due to the shocking appearance of her son, she wakes up frightened. Yumin informs her that they are in the annex bunker, but the woman begins to deny it repeatedly, insisting that what is happening cannot be true. Finally, she concludes that the monster she saw is not her son. However, Yumin confirms it is him, showing on a screen Kang Ji-hyung, 23 years old. She explains that he fell into the red portal by accident and managed to escape, although transformed into a monster. Since then, he has been fighting alongside hunters worldwide to stop the advance of the red portal, and also with the goal of saving. She continues looking at her son. We then return to the moment he was dragged back into the portal. The young man quickly wakes up in another place, more precisely in his home, but in the past. He wonders if he has really returned and runs to his mother to tell her. It is then that the woman turns around with a different appearance, asking if he has truly returned. However, it all turns out to be just an illusion of the young man, who, by the way, managed to hold on. Already partly inside, he begins to transform. He screams in pain as his body begins to change, accompanied by the suffering of the pain he feels. This makes him hallucinate, specifically with his mother, and he asks if she is okay. The woman responds that yes, everything is fine. However, the boy insists, saying that because of him, his father, before he can finish speaking, his mother calls him by name and, somewhat nervously, asks him to smile. That is the end of his memory, as he begins laughing uncontrollably while his transformation progresses. Finally, he starts coming out of the portal, something that sparks the curiosity of the other hunter. However, this one cannot react, as he is quickly kicked by Ji-hyung, who was already fully transformed. At that moment, Ji-hyung thinks that, once again, he has acted like an idiot, and that he must go see his mother. But before doing so, he jumps at the hunter and asks why he did it, ready to bite his face. However, the hunter manages to distance himself just before the monster almost tears off a piece of his face. But that does not stop him, as he quickly lunges for the attack, about to sink his claws into him. At that moment, it is revealed that in China, they are talking about the monster that is on a completely different level and has reached the United States to face it. A being with a peculiar appearance questions whether they can really win, while China's second SSS-ranked hunter, Lun Jue, responds incredulously. She wonders if he truly believes her brother will be defeated. It is then explained that in China, they will quickly resolve the portal crisis thanks to their overwhelming population of hunters. In the past, hunters from multiple guilds outside state control came together to welcome a new era. However, that promising start ended in disaster, as in the end, all were eliminated. All of that was thanks to two people. Lun Jue comments that her brother eliminated them all and that now he will revive them to turn them into slaves. She curiously asks if that is the way they will unify China, to which her brother, in fact, they succeeded, as they soon managed to unify China. This was possible thanks to her brother, whose strength surpassed all common sense. By the way, that person was facing the bone monster that attacked him. The hunter mentions that he had heard rumors about someone extremely strong and that it would be fun to face him. That man was Lun Juguang, an SSS-ranked hunter. However, Ji-hyung was enraged. After cursing him, he broke his weapons and with a defiant look, asked him if he thought it was fun for cutting off his head. After the deadly attack, Bones asks if it was fun, believing he had eliminated him. However, the same hunter, who should be lifeless, appeared ready to launch an attack. Or in this case, multiple attacks, as he quickly slashes the monster while simultaneously responding to the question. The cuts were so powerful that they even sliced through a building behind Bones. As the debris falls near the man, He says that it was a very fun. It is then that Bones reappears and comments that he is also having fun, launching a counterattack. Landing the attack on the hunter, it creates a shockwave, or so Ji-hyung thought, as Ju-gwang manages to stop the attack while asking what happened. He also mentions that he heard Ji-hyung was very strong and came from China specifically to see him. Then Ju-gwang questions if he is really human. Ji-hyung wants to know what he means by that, and Ju-gwang responds that what he feels from him is definitely the magical power of a monster. It is then that Bones quickly turns and reaches the hunter. However, the latter reacts simultaneously, launching an attack and creating distance. Even though he is a monster, he is fighting to protect someone. This raises doubts in his opponent, who wonders if Bones also has something or someone to protect, pointing to the broken building behind him. Ji-hyung, smiling, responds that yes, his mother is there, the one who abandoned him, and despite everything, he still loves her. Ju-gwang, hearing this, comments that there seems to be a story behind it and admits that he also has something similar. He remembers that he and his sister, since they were children, were nothing alike. Then he shouts to the wind that a man must always dream of being the strongest in the world, and if there is a powerful enemy, he must face it, win the fight, and proclaim himself the strongest. With that spirit, he begins to attack them. At the same time, he shouts for Bones to join the battle, launching himself into the attack. Ji-hyung responds to the call by breaking his weapon with a powerful strike, but something happens. Every time Ju-gwang launches an attack, Ji-hyung blocks it, breaking his weapon over and over. These weapons seem to have a life of their own. It is then that Bones prepares a direct attack toward Ju-gwang's spear, which curiously seemed to be crying. But it was useless, as the spear was completely destroyed. After that move, both stand still, and Ji-hyung observes what he had in his hand. Ju-gwang explains that it is a weapon created by a craftsman who used a hunter's body. This impresses Ji-hyung, who throws himself into the attack, exclaiming that this is utter madness. In one of Ju-gwang's attacks, he manages to cut off his opponent's head. However, the latter quickly zippins his body, reattaches the head in place, and at the same time launches an attack against Ju-gwang, seemingly slicing his head in half. The impact throws him against the wall behind, but at the same time he appears to regenerate. At that moment, a man appears and calls out to him. It is the S-rank blacksmith, Ge-Yao-fang. The young man addresses him and asks if he has gathered the hunter's bodies. The blacksmith replies that yes, he has collected around 40 corpses. Ju-gwang then orders him to continue working and launches into the attack again, while the blacksmith had transformed his hand into a hammer. He begins to pound something, and the impacts of the tool resound along with the agonizing screams of people crying for help and screaming in pain. After some time, the blacksmith declares that he is finished, stating that he has created a true masterpiece. He walks toward Ju-gwang and hands him a strap. The young man thanks him and, with great force, hurls the massive mace directly at Ji-hyung. This strikes him, sending him flying while he hears the screams of people who should no longer be alive. At that moment, Bones takes 2 hits from the massive mace formed by bodies and bangs them together, warning the others not to touch him. However, the hunter hurls the mace at the monster again. The latter, somewhat immobilized, realizes that all of those present are the same hunters he eliminated. He declares that he eliminated many and shouts that those who are already dead are easier to exterminate, while slicing the massive mace of bodies into multiple. After that, Ju-gwang mentions that he always tries to record everything and explains that 5 years ago in Korea, he managed to extract an eye. He also reveals that the magic of the sword he now possesses. It is then that the image of his friend begins to surface in his mind, who, by the way, was eliminated by his own hands. Then he realizes that the sword is Jin-hyung and that the eye he extracted is now in Ju-gwang's possession. Following that revelation, Ju-gwang tells the monster that he fled without even fighting, calling him a coward. Just as the hunter deflects an attack, he begins to distance himself while begging to stop living, his body reducing to small pieces of flesh. Inside his mind, Ji-hyung was crying. At that moment, someone calls him. Looking ahead, he sees that it is his friend, which makes him scream and collapse. His friend approaches and tells him that it is okay, that they are still friends. But then, the scene changes. and his friend asks, "Why did you do? I helped you. Why did you eliminate me?" he demands. Those words, along with others, resonate in Ji-young's mind, who falls to the ground while screaming. However, he remembers when his mother told him that he must always smile, which leads him to laugh. In the midst of his madness, he begins to hurt himself and tries to cut off his head. Over and over again, he repeats the action, which finally drives him to complete insanity over everything that has happened. Ju-guang, watching this, smiles. Jin-hyung also smiles as he continues to injure himself and laugh until he finally asks if anyone wants to eliminate him, revealing that behind him are multiple. Meanwhile, in China, Ju-wei wonders if her brother is having fun fighting. However, someone interrupts her. Annoyed, the woman asks what he wants. A knight informs her that the hunters in the northeast are being massacred, which leaves the girl shocked. Immediately after, she asks what is happening, and it is revealed that Tae-soo and the girl accompanying him are eliminating living armors as they advance toward the main castle. In the northeast of China, more precisely in Heilongjiang province, Tae-soo arrives. He comments on the cold weather but then begins to act strangely. He reveals that he seems to be collapsing from the sheer amount of powers he has. His companion, seeing this, quickly runs to his aid. She begs him to stop, saying it is enough, and strictly speaking, it was all his fault. However, the man screams that no, it was that guy who started it all. The young man, by the way, is quickly attacked by the hunter, who immediately cuts him, causing him to lose his left arm and leg. But the attack does not end there, as his opponent strikes him swiftly with his sword. The impact makes him explode, like a balloon of flesh. He begins regenerating immediately, but just before he finishes, the hunter strikes him in the eye. His freshly regenerated body violently crashes into a nearby building. The monster begins to recompose, but the man attacking him relentlessly delivers the multiple slashes, shredding all his flesh without resistance. Thus, after some time, Ji-hyung lies on the ground, surrounded by remnants of his own body at Ju-guang's feet. Then, Ju-guang raises his spear to deliver a fatal blow to Ji-hyung's head. However, the latter continues to smile despite missing half of his head. Ju-guang then summons his other weapons, which descend at great speed. This causes Ji-hyung to be destroyed once more as a crater forms around this impact. Only an arm remains, which quickly regenerates the rest of the body. It is then that Ju-guang strikes the monster, sending him into the air. Taking advantage of the position, he places himself above him and hurls his spear, piercing Ji-hyung and sending him to what appears to be a river. The monster begins to sink, still impaled by the spear. In the vastness of the water, he starts to run out of air, feeling a deep anguish. Until, in an instant, he remembers his mother, who asks him to smile. In his madness, to fulfill his mother's wish, Ji-hyung smiles, losing even more of the air he no longer. However, something begins to happen. Red portals start sending what appears to be their energy toward the bone monster. This energy causes a whirlpool to form in the middle of the river, from which Ji-hyung emerges, but completely transformed. Ju-guang watches the scene attentively, but before he can react, his head is severed in an extremely fast motion. Fortunately, the hunter reacts in time and retrieves the two separated parts, quickly reuniting them. This reveals a green liquid that seems to regenerate his wounds. Without hesitation, Ju-guang launches another attack. Though not fully regenerated, he manages to strike a blow that causes Ji-hyung's body to explode. But he returns almost immediately, preparing a new attack, something his opponent had already anticipated. Ju-guang delivers multiple attacks to the bone monster, elevating him gird into the satis with each strike of his spear. Ji-hyung is sent into space. In a zero-gravity environment, Ji-hyung loses his head, which falls toward Earth. That part begins to the atmosphere, engulfed in flames, while still smiling. Ju-guang, seeing the scene, can only say and think that it is truly beautiful. At that moment, Ji-hyung was about to strike. Meanwhile, Tae-soo has been captured, and Ju-guang's sister asks if he was the one eliminating her babies. After saying that and finding out that he was the one who eliminated the living armors, the woman asks if a single hunter is going to fight against 100 million of her armors. It is at that moment when Tae-soo responds affirmatively and immediately attacks, buying time to free himself and get the girl accompanying him out. He says that he cannot give up, especially after having come so far, all while the armors kept pursuing them. But Tae-soo did not want to surrender, as his goal was to eliminate Kang Ji-hyung. This makes the young, blue-haired man recall when he was with his friends. One of them comments that there are too many hunters in the world and that they are now fighting among themselves. However, he then asks Tae-soo that if they are ever eliminated in battle, he should absorb their powers. The boy, incredulous, questions that he couldn't do it, but his friend explains that even if they die, they will live on together with their dear friend forever. They are his friends and want them always to stay together. Back in the present, he says that he could not fulfill his promise. The girl, upon hearing this, questions what he is saying while wearing a confused expression. This is because, on that day, when his friend mentioned there were many hunters fighting among themselves, she was with them. Tae-soo only replied that when that moment came, he would already be dead. His friend, upon hearing this, tries to say something, but the bully climbs down from the tree and, with a threatening tone, asks if there is. Back in the present, the young man mentions that he had to avenge his friends, but the girl bestip him questions what is happening to him. By the way, he walked alone to the army of Lun Ju-wei, who holds the second spot in China as the most powerful hunter. Her abilities are resurrection and the enslavement of the revived dead. Thanks to those abilities, the girl revived all her hunters, and one could say that, in a way, she is China herself. It is then that she sends all her warriors to attack Tae-soo. However, deep down, she felt that something was wrong with him, which became evident through the ferocity of the battle. She soon concluded that he was far beyond the SSS rank, although, upon reconsidering, she understood that he did not belong to that rank. He was beyond any human rank, showing just how imposing Tae-soo could be with all his power. The girl ordered her warriors to fight, but fear, although almost completely erased, was still present within them. That triggered their survival instinct, making them all flee. However, Lun Ju-wei shouted for them to return to fight, reminding them that she was behind them. At the same time she gave this order, she activated her powers to dispel the fear, proclaiming that she would save their lives. With a new shout, she instilled some hope in them and urged them to fight. Nonetheless, Tae-soo was too strong and defeated them all with ease. Meanwhile, in his mind, he began to collapse more and more, complaining of the intense headache he felt. On the other hand, the woman claimed that she was Chinese and questioned if he would lose to someone like him. To which he replied, yes, cutting off of her head. That brief moment of life makes her remember her past, when someone was captured while a person proclaimed that the land now belonged to the Manhwa sect. That person was Chow Min, who asked why she was still there while she called him a bastard. Through tears, she shouted that this was the place where her family had lived for generations and that she would not leave. But just after saying that, her head was cut off. Her head fell to where her children seemed to be, who remained silent to avoid screaming in fear. Those responsible for that said it was time to leave, leaving behind the little ones who were hiding. The girl, witnessing the scene, tried to call out to her mother, but her brother asked why she was crying. He added that their parents simply lost their lives because they were. The girl looked at him and asked if he was not sad. He in turn asked why he would be, explaining that anyway, when he was stronger, he would eliminate them all. In the present, that little girl, now a grown woman, asks her brother if, just because she is weak, she is going to be asleep forever. Tae-soo confirms while taking the candy out of his mouth and breaking it with a bite. Meanwhile, Ji-hyung was already ready to strike his opponent, landing the blow perfectly. The impact breaks the walls, sending his opponent into a red portal, throwing him in there and smiling at his action. However, before falling, the hunter grabs Ji-hyung's leg, who quickly reacts by attacking to cut off his hand. But Ju-gwang, while hanging and about to fall into the world of the red portal, is struck by the energy coming from that place. Immediately, he uses his poison power, sending a lethal toxin throughout Ji-hyung's body. This leaves him motionless for a few seconds, which the hunter takes advantage of. As he begins to exit the portal, he wonders if he came from a place like that, referring to the world inside the red portal. Additionally, after coming out, he shouts in amazement that this is incredible and now understands why he is so strong. He acknowledges him as the most formidable funster of all his opponents, even as he attacks him with fury. He breaks the wall with ease, throwing him a considerable distance. However, the attack doesn't end there. Zhuguang, with a voice full of determination, declares that, because of what happened, he will be the first to feel the effect of his special poison. With surprising speed, he leaps and embeds his hand, full of toxins, into the monster's chest. Moreover, he explains that his special poison combines all the world's poisons, intoxicating every cell of Zhuguang and making them explode brutally. At that moment, the hunter asks how it feels and questions whether he still has the ability to fight. At the same time, he reveals that Ji-hyung is motionless, but soon receives the energy from the red portals, which allows him to move and attack Zhuguang with renewed strength. That attack causes the man to stagger, and as he does, he reflects on what is happening. He feels an emotion that reminds him of the taste of a sweet he tried for the first time as a child. It's a warm and familiar sensation, evoking the distant memories. In that instant, he also remembers his father's smile and how, in his first fight, he experienced not only the harshness of battle, but also the euphoria of his first victory. With that victory fresh in his mind, he advances to the second, third, and fourth, knowing that each one lost its value until he reached 1 billion victories. However, in the midst of his reflection, he is struck. That feeling, that blow, becomes something much greater than all the victories he could count. It's a sensation that surpasses everything he has experienced so far, and he wonders what that strange yet powerful feeling is. At that moment, he activates his power, unleashing a tornado of poison that destroys everything in its path, while his mind focuses on understanding that at the center of the tornado are Zhuguang and Ji-hyung. Both begin to disintegrate, being consumed by the poisonous whirl. Their bodies disintegrate, slowly fading into the air as the storm continues its relentless course. The hunter's action makes him recall a moment from the past, when a woman confessed to him, declaring that she loved him. However, he appeared thoughtful at the time and reflects deeply, questioning what love truly is. Revealing shortly after that he was in a room full of concubines, a place that, despite its apparent splendor, seemed devoid of meaning. The woman lying beside him breaks the silence with a soft laugh as she slowly gets up. She expresses her emotions and, with tears starting to run down her face, declares with a voice full of conviction that someday he will also know what love is, hinting at her own understanding of the feeling. It is at that precise moment that the hunter has a revelation. His mind clears and everything begins to make sense. The tension shifts to the whirlwind surrounding them, where both beings, trapped in chaos, start to fuse in an inexplicable way. Each passing second unites them more deeply, their bodies intertwining as the energies from the red portals accelerate the process. The fusions not only connects their bodies, but also their memories and emotions. They share intimate recollections and, for the first time, smile with a complicity that transcends the physical. However, destiny has other plans. A part of the building, thrown into the air by the creation of the tornado, begins to descend with force. The impact is devastating. The fused bodies are destroyed, and what remains of them are mere pieces of flesh scattered across the battlefield. Meanwhile, in a quieter corner, Ji-hyung's mother watches the scene. Her recovery is progressing slowly, and although she is clearly moved by her son's battle, she is much calmer than the last time she saw him. Now with Yeju, Tae-soo's friend, she observes, somewhat frightened, how the young man who accompanied her was injured, with marks showing recent suffering. Concerned, she runs toward him and with a trembling voice, asks if he is aware of how much she has worried about him. Her words are both a reproach and a show of affection, but Tae-soo's response surprises her. With a lost look, he calls her by name and asks her, in a tone mixing confusion and despair, why they ended up this way. As he speaks, his mind seems to rewind to blurry memories of his childhood, moments that left a deep mark on him. The weight of those memories traps him, and in the present, Yeju embraces him in an attempt to comfort him. It's a warm, desperate hug, as if she were trying to hold him while he, with a choked voice, confesses that he only wanted to be loved, that he had always longed for something so simple and yet relative. At another moment in the day, Tae-soo recalls fragments of his past, disordered images of when his world shattered, saying that outside, under a vast and clear sky, he wondered if he was hiding inside his mother's closet or if that was just an illusion his mind created to protect him. Meanwhile, in front of him, under that same sky's light, the mocking gaze of an unknown person pierces his soul. That expression, so cruel and disdainful, marked the beginning of his descent into the abyss of suffering. Yeju cannot hold back her tears and begins to cry, feeling deep empathy for Tae-soo's pain. However, something startles her. She notices someone else is approaching. With her heart rending, she looks up, and upon seeing a figure slowly approaching, she cannot help but wonder, with a mix of unease and curiosity, who is she? After asking that question, Yeju remembers she is a hunter from Japan and wonders how she ended up there. However, the woman quickly changes the subject and asks Tae-soo if he was gathering power to take revenge on Kang Ji-hyung. Hearing this, the man fixes his gaze on her and asks if she is there to support him. She responds that she is not alone, revealing there are hunters capable of reviving the awakened dead and that they are allied with him. Then she asks him for something unexpected, to save a person. As she speaks, she shows him the frozen head. The woman explains that the two of them are the strongest hunters in Japan and that they would be of great help. But Tae-soo, instead of responding, begins to laugh like a madman. At that moment, in the shadows, someone begins to open their eyes. It is revealed to be the strongest hunter in Japan, who has returned to life. Incidentally, the first thing he sees is Hanami's head, his girl. Tae-soo, with a malicious smile, asks why she calls him so affectionately, revealing that this monster stole the abilities of the Ice Woman after reviving her boyfriend. This enrages the man, who charges at him full of anger. But the blue-haired man, with a single move, manages to decapitate the man engulfed in flames, holding the head and absorbing both his powers and his memories, visualizing the entire battle he had with Ji-hyung. On the other hand, that monster begins to regenerate and slowly advances toward his opponent, getting closer and closer to Ju-gwang. For his part, Ju-gwang, full of fury, gets up shakily while shouting Kang Ji-hyung's name with all his might. Over and over, his voice grows louder with each step the monster takes toward him. Finally, they stand face to face. It is at that moment, amidst the tension, that Ju-gwang, with an unusual calm, reveals that he has found all of this amusing. His words bring back a distant memory, a moment with his father. Back then, his father told him with seriousness that he had to become strong, someone who could avoid suffering the humiliation of that day. Ju-gwang clearly remembered the scene. They were both standing in front of a burning house. With tears in his eyes, the man begged his son to become strong enough to defeat him someday. But then, unexpectedly and with a swift move, the young man cut off his father's head. Holding the head, he called his father joyfully, triumphantly declaring that he had won. He called him over and over, but there was no response. Returning to the present, Ju-gwang, too weak to speak, takes his last breath and falls face first to the ground, thinking about. Then, the blacksmith, who made his weapons, slowly approaches. With sadness in his eyes, he calls out to his master, but upon noticing that he has died, he kneels beside his booty and breaks into tears. He transforms his hand into a hammer and between sobs, declares that Ju-gwang is finally dead. However, just before striking him, something unexpected happens. Ju-gwang's poison begins to take effect on the blacksmith, causing his instant death. Meanwhile, Ji-hyung remains emotionless, unable to move, still under the effects of the poison that weakened him. The scene reveals the impact of the battle, the lives lost as collateral damage, and the chaos left in its wake. Amid the desolation, an unexpected attack hits Ji-hyung. The assailant turned out to be one of the survivors of the fierce fight between the two monsters. Severely injured and crawling, he manages to launch one last attack before falling. Shortly after, several survivors pounced on Ji-hyung, seeking revenge for everything that had happened. In their desperation, they needed someone to blame for their suffering. Thus, they began attacking Ji-hyung's motionless body, destroying it further and further. The fury of those present had no limit. The attack was repeated over and over, revealing the deep anger they felt for the destruction caused by the battle. They even used a truck to crush Ji-hyung's remains. Despite his state, it seemed he still had some consciousness. He reflected bitterly on how he would never see his mother again. At that moment, his only wish was to disappear completely. However, a voice called out to him. When he looked, he saw it was his mother and the hunter with healing abilities. At that moment, the woman made a grave mistake. She called him son. The response was immediate and brutal. A stone flew straight toward the woman's head. Ji-hyung, astonished and anxious, watched what had happened, fearing what was to come. On the other hand, after Tae-soo absorbed the memories and powers of Japan's strongest hunter, he began to speak in nonsense. More precisely, he repeated the conversations the hunter, whose powers and memories he had just absorbed, had during his life. His companion, seeing that he was lost in that sea of memories, began to approach him. As she did, she activated her power and apologized, as she intended to seal him again. She didn't want to lose him. That brief moment made her recall something from her childhood. In what appeared to be her home, she witnessed someone being cursed. It was revealed that a man was hitting his wife, blaming her for everything that had happened in his life. The woman, clinging to her husband's leg, begged for mercy. That was when Yeju revealed that her mother was autistic. This caused the doors of help from people and awakenings to be shut, resulting in a complete catastrophe for them. Since her mother, unable to control her abilities, ended up killing her husband instantly. However, due to her mental instability and having children, she received a suspended sentence. She thought it was for the best. However, her brother did not feel the same. After that tragic day, he began working outside, bringing some violence into the house. As the days passed, he became more and more brutal and violent. It was then, around that time, that Yeju had her awakening. She wondered if becoming a hunter and earning a lot of money could allow her to escape that hell. But one night, while she was falling asleep thinking about it, a noise woke her abruptly with her brother very close to her. She quickly began to run away, but her pursuer caught up to her, hitting her foot and causing her to fall. He cursed her and then began to hit her. They were outside the house, and the girl was screaming for help while trying to defend herself from her brother's blows. But he didn't just plan to hit her, he was attempting to do something worse, and she desperately struggled to stop him. That was when her mother heard her screams. She threw herself on what was her son while shouting at him to stop. But the monster kicked her, telling her to leave. The kick was so strong that the woman, unfortunately, hit her head on the ground. Her daughter, seeing that her mother was not moving, began to crawl toward her. When she reached her, she realized what her supposed brother. He, without showing a clear reaction, simply said that what was happening was really bad. Immediately, he threw himself on his sister, as she called him Gerst. After those events, she is in the park with Tae-soo, right at the moment when he reveals that he has killed someone again. The boy wonders how many more he will have to kill for all this to end, revealing his sadness about the ability he possesses and the parents who force him to use. That is when Yeju calls him, explaining that she has awakened her own abilities and can control the magical power, adding that she can contain his powers. He asks if that is true, but before she can respond, he makes it clear that before doing so, he wants her to kill one more, revealing her face is swollen from the blows. Thus, he heads to Yeju's house, knocking on the door. At that moment, the young man opens the door and asks about his sister, who has not yet arrived. Without wasting time, Tae-soo pierces him with a diamond sword, causing the young man to fall lifeless as he absorbs his memories. This leaves Tae-soo somewhat confused, even more so when someone calls out to him. It was his brother asking what he was doing while activating his ability, materializing a chain around his neck. His brother begins to strangle him with the leash, asking if he has had enough. He questions whether the killing has not been enough for him. Without Taisu's brother noticing, Yeju activates her ability and launches an attack. Unfortunately, Taisu's attacker manages to grab her hand, preventing her from completing the attack. Seeing this, Taisu lunges along with the leash, causing his brother to lose balance and fall. That moment is seized by his companion, who quickly places her hand on him and activates her ability, starting to seal his. Taisu can only watch as the chains begin to disappear. At that moment, before his brother could say anything, Taisu apologizes and creates a huge diamond stake, piercing the one who was once his brother. The two young people approach and, a bit scared, Yeju asks what they will do now, but Taisu asks her not to worry as he will protect her for the rest of her life. After that flashback, we return to the present with Taisu in a state of shock over what happened. Before she could reach him, he took her hand and asked her what she was doing. Immediately after, he made her explode and cursed at her before his companion could utter a word. In his desperation over what he did, he tries to gather some parts of his friend while crying. Immediately, he activates his hunter resurrection power, and a hand begins to emerge from the center of the red pool. That hand asks if he is. Taisu, overwhelmed by the despair of what is happening, screams with such intensity, then vomits over what he did. And lying on the ground, he begins to hit his head repeatedly. After a while, he gets up. He activates his multiplication power, creating several copies of him, sending each of them flying around the world with the goal of having each take a red portal with their own hands. And with an expression of rage and anguish, he begins to close the portals one by one. On the other hand, the president of the Hunters Association and Ji-hyung's mother approached the crowd of people who were about to completely eliminate the monster, or at least attempt to. That caught the attention of everyone present, as it was not common to see the S-rank killer in places like that. However, what surprised everyone the most was that the woman accompanying the hunter called the remains of the monster lying on the ground son. This caused someone to throw a stone at her, something that was observed by Ji-hyung. On the other hand, many of the people there were pleading with the healer to heal them, as they were in great pain. But instead of doing so, the woman placed her hand on one of their shoulders and told them not to worry. At that very moment, something happened. A menacing presence filled the entire place. The healer declared that, in any case, everyone would die. Then, it was revealed that Ji-hyung was whole and had taken on another appearance, one less human and more monstrous. His mother, upon seeing him, steadied herself and remembered the moment he was born. She began to approach. With each step she took toward her son, a memory unlocked. Finally, when she was in front of him, she saw him as the little boy he once was. Remembering those moments when she stroked his head, and now she could no longer do so. The woman closed her eyes and confirmed that she was, indeed, his mother. With tears in her eyes, she declared that she didn't care how he looked and that she loved him. Right after saying that, someone grabbed the edges of her face and, in the end, tore it as if it were paper. It was Taisu who committed that atrocity. Unlike the previous time he attacked the woman, this time he fulfilled his intention and he did it right in front of her son. Incidentally, the son had no time to react as Taisu quickly beheaded him. Everyone, upon witnessing it, praised that Han Taisu from the Keum Kang Guild. At that moment, Taisu reported that he had closed all the portals in the world and that what was behind Ji-hyung was the last one. Just then, Ji-hyung was regenerated. But Taisu, using some of his abilities, pushed him toward the red door. With one last look, he bid farewell to Ji-hyung, who began to fall back into the portal. With tears in his eyes, and as everyone praised Han Taisu, he closed the portal. Ji-hyung fell to the floor within the portal, with the unforgettable memory of Taisu killing his mother and closing his red portal. Immediately afterward, the attack of the monsters within that dimension began, directed at Ji-hyung. Monsters begin attacking Ji-hyung. With great effort, he manages to defend himself, eliminating each creature while maintaining an expression of rage and pain. Every movement reflects his desperation and constant struggle to stay alive in a hostile and relentless environment. At a critical moment, when more monsters appear, Ji-hyun slips and falls to the ground. As he looks up, his vision fills with multiple faces identical to Tae-soo's, each bearing the same mocking and disdainful expression. This sight fuels his anger even further. With a dark gaze and brutal determination, Ji-hyun charges at these figures, cutting them in half one by one. His expression reveals absolute hatred, making it clear that the little humanity he had left has completely vanished, consumed by pain and rage. However, his fury has little time to manifest, as a gigantic monster crushes him under its foot. But Ji-hyun, relentless, pierces through the monster's foot from the inside, emerging from the wound he created, drenched in red liquid and with a fierce look of determination. When he raises his eyes to the horizon, he is met with an endless sea of monsters advancing toward him. This devastating scene makes it clear that there is no escape, no place to hide. Despite this, Ji-hyun makes a firm decision. The only option left is to fight. Surrendering is not an option, and dying for him is simply impossible. 6 years have passed since that fateful day. News reports announce that 6 years ago, a tragic incident claimed countless lives, a case known as the Bloodgate disaster. Back then, the national hero, Hunter Han Tae-soo, managed to save many, earning everyone's admiration. However, upon hearing the broadcast, Tae-soo himself, with a dark and enraged expression, grabs a diamond stake and smashes the television without. In the same room, he is accompanied by 2 beautiful women. One of them, surprised by his reaction, dares to ask why he is acting that way, to which he brusquely responds, asking her to stay quiet. Another woman, visibly uncomfortable, quietly comments that he is too cold and distant. Those words seem to ignite a spark within him, awakening a restrained bite. Immediately, he activates his power as painful memories of what happened to his only friend flood his mind. The act unleashes a terrifying outcome. The woman who made the comment violently explodes, drenching everyone present in a thick red liquid. The other woman, terrified by what happened, begins screaming desperately and flees the scene, calling for help. Amid this chaos, a new figure enters the room. It is Lee Yumin. With a determined look, she approaches the hunter and tells him firmly that acting this way will solve nothing. Her tone, though soft, carries an authority that seems to partially ease the tension in the air. With steady steps, Yumin approaches him. Showing no fear, she climbs onto the bed where he lies, his face still hardened by anger and pain. Then, in a low but determined voice, she informs him that she is the only one who can heal him. Activating her powers, the woman places a hand on his head. That simple gesture seems to deeply soothe Tae-soo, as within seconds, tears begin streaming down his cheeks, revealing the emotional burden he carries. He vividly recalls the moment he defeated Ji-hyun. All those present, witnesses to the act, broke out in praises and celebrations. However, Tae-soo paid no attention to them. All he did was vanish, leaving behind an atmosphere of confusion and bewilderment among those who witnessed his departure. In his solitude, he teleported to the park where he used to meet his friend. There he remained for a long time under the rain, with the water poking at his body and soothing the sting of his emotions. It was then that someone arrived. Lee Yumin. Without hesitation, she covered him with her cloak, offering not only warmth, but also a gesture of support in his moment of vulnerability. After that memory, the scene returns to the present. In a tired voice, Tae-soo comments on how someone who was once Kang Ji-hyun's ally ended up in such a desolate situation. The woman, in an intriguing tone, asks him if he doesn't want to see him. Confused, Tae-soo responds with another question. Who? Yumin, staring at him intently, answers without hesitation. Kang Ji-hyun. These words leave him completely stunned. Immediately after, Yumin coldly adds that 6 years ago, he killed Ji-hyun's mother right in front of him. Not only that, but he didn't even fight him. He simply threw him into the red portal and closed it, sealing his fate with a definitive gesture. This piqued her curiosity, and she questioned him if he was afraid of the monster that wiped out all SSS-ranked individuals. The question angers him to the point of being on the verge of pouncing on the healer. While grabbing her forcefully, he confesses in rage that yes, he wants to see him, to completely destroy him. He also reveals that this is why he tried to open the red portal over and over again, as he was curious to know if he was suffering. However, he failed in all his attempts. It is then that Yumin, with unsettling calm, mentions that she has something interesting to tell him. She explains that, according to the laws of the universe, the world functions cyclically. It enters a state of destruction, and during these times, something known as the gate emerges. Over time, one of these gates ended up connecting with hell, and that is what they call the Blood Gate. She then adds that he threw Kang Ji-hyung into hell, but warns that the administrator of that place will find him. She informs him that he will soon see him again, leaving Tae-soo surprised and visibly shaken. Furious, he demands an explanation for what she is saying. However, Yumin does not respond. Instead, she simply asks him to wait, as he too needs to survive until that day comes. With that, she begins to leave the bed. But Tae-soo, unable to contain himself, calls her back and, grabbing her wrist, demands to know how she knows all this. For her part, Yumin begins to laugh. She looks at him intently and, with an enigmatic smile, asks if he is curious. This is how she confirms that she will tell everything. She begins by explaining that in hell, there is an administrator named Fail. She explains that if all the portals in the world turned into red portals, Fail would ascend to a higher existence, capable of leading the Infernal Legion and destroying the world. However, despite having destroyed billions of worlds over time, this time was different. For the first time, he saw no open portals, as all had been completely closed. In the present, the healer reveals that the creation of portals is an immutable law of the universe. Even for someone like Fail, it is impossible to open new portals by himself. Nevertheless, when Lord Ji-hyung managed to escape from hell, he caused a crack in the dimension. That fracture in the fabric of space could allow him to open portals if he were to receive Fail's power. For this reason, when Ji-hyung fell back, Fail tried to locate him, tracking human magical energy in the hopes of finding him. But his search ended in absolute failure. At that moment, Ji-hyung was no longer the same. He had transformed into a demonic beast, hidden behind a new identity. However, after 6 long years, Fail has finally managed to find his whereabouts. At that very moment, the sky turned a deep red, as if foretelling a transcendental event. The healer let out a slight laugh, her expression reflecting a mix of irony and acceptance of what was happening. Meanwhile, Tae-soo, with a furrowed brow, observed the scene without looking away, analyzing every detail cautiously. But before that phenomenon took place, Ji-hyung, with a somber face, spoke with his mother. He confessed that he had had a nightmare, his voice laden with unease. He was sitting in front of a huge screen, flanked by 2 silent figures on either side. In his story, he coldly detailed how his mother had been torn in half, losing her life in a brutal and irreversible manner. He then remembered his return to hell, a journey from which he could never truly escape. There he was consumed by despair and transformed into a demonic beast. Since that fateful day, 6 years had passed. 6 years of suffering, internal struggle, a torment that never ceased. He reflected on the offer he had received. If he accepted the power of that being who had visited him, he would gain the opportunity to leave. However, freedom had an unthinkable price. The destruction of... He wondered if he had lost his sanity, if he truly longed to escape at any cost. Inside him, the desire to leave and take revenge burned with uncontrollable intensity. He could not forget that monster named Han Tae-soo. With a firm voice, he declared his intention to make him pay for all the pain he had caused. At first, he thought of returning the suffering in the same way, replicating his cruelty. But the idea quickly evolved. He reflected that it was not enough. He wanted his punishment to be even more painful, for suffering to consume him completely, for him not to have a single moment of relief. He delighted in imagining the moment when he could twist his insides while he was still alive, prolonging his agony until the last second. The person to his right broke the silence with a simple observation, saying that it was cruel. Ji-hyung was unfazed. He knew he could not eliminate innocent people. His moral code had not completely vanished. The person to his left admitted, acknowledging the truth of his words. However, Ji-hyung threw an unexpected question at them, his tone laden with resentment and bitterness. He asked if they wanted to know something. Without waiting for an answer, he confessed that when he was a child, he was also an innocent. The memory of his father tormented him. He had lost his life when a truck ran a red light without stopping, robbing him of the chance to stay by his side. Later, during his school years, the monster Han Tae-soo began to beat him mercilessly. In his mind, the question kept repeating, what fault did he have in all this? The memories kept coming one after another. He spent 5 long years trapped in the red portal dimension, 5 years of suffering and survival. When he finally managed to get out, he eliminated all those who stood in his way, but that had not been an act of gratuitous cruelty. He did it in self-defense. The day he eliminated the Japanese hunters, he did so with only one purpose: to save his mother. He could not allow them to hurt her. What happened with Lucas was different. He had lost his mind. He had gone completely insane, and even though at that moment he had the power to help him, he also remembered the idiot Chinese man who appeared unexpectedly. If it hadn't been for him, he would now be living in peace with his mother. He had no choice, but none of that compared to the worst of his memories. The moment his mother was torn in half. It didn't matter what he had done before, not even if he had made different choices. In the end, Han Tae-soo would have gone to eliminate her anyway. On the screen in front of him, Ji-hyung appeared once again, calling his mother. With a firm voice, he declared that he would only tell the truth. And he did. He confessed that he had eliminated many. Now, he only wanted everyone to be eliminated. His thirst for revenge was absolute. The person to his right, unable to contain the beatles, murmured that it was too much. Then, the movie theater screen showed an unexpected ending. Immediately, the credits began to roll. Every acknowledgement was directed at Kang Ji-hyung, which for a moment made him laugh. But the laughter soon faded. His expression changed. His rage exploded. He cursed everything that had happened to him. It was then that the truth was revealed. The people accompanying him were not just figures in his mind, they were the halves of his mother, fragments of what she once was. But even with that revelation, the story on the screen showed a post-credit scene. A version of Tae-soo said that the world had lived in peace for a long time. Han Tae-soo was considered the savior of the nation. And then he himself spoke. He said that everyone had been happy, and that if he didn't exist, everything would be much better. His words left no room for doubt. He was referring. However, the projection was not over. On the screen, the drawing came to life and posed one last question, as if the movie had not yet ended. Ji-hyung responds coldly, cutting it in half with a precise movement. After that, his mother, with a vacant expression, comments that in the end, nothing remains. Her voice sounds hollow, as if the certainty of her words weighed more than reality itself. Ji-hyung, instead of responding immediately, lets out a brief, joyless laugh. Then, without looking away, he continues on his way. As he walks away, he slowly turns on his heels, casting one last glance at his mother. His lips move, saying that he already knows. At that very moment, tears begin to roll down her face, silent and treacherous. It is then that we return to when the sky turned red, as a rift had formed there. The rift, deep and dark, pulses with a crimson glow, throbbing and alive. From that opening, a red portal emerges, and from it comes Ji-hyung, or at least, something that resembles him. His figure is almost recognizable, but his essence has changed. Now, he is a distorted version of himself, a monstrous shadow of what he once was. At that very instant, his eyes meet Tae-soo's. A tense silence grips the place, heavy with anticipation. Tae-soo, without hesitation, seizes the fraction of a second he has and activates his. In a matter of moments, his body begins to multiply, blurring into the air until he becomes an army of clones, ready for battle. The battle begins with a clash of attacks that triggers a colossal explosion. Amid the chaos, Ji-hyung is atop a dragon, which starts channeling an immense amount of energy. As he prepares to launch his attack against Tae-soo, energy concentrates in his mouth, vibrating with overwhelming power. Finally, the blast is unleashed, obliterating Tae-soo's clone and everyone on the ground. The devastation is absolute as the bone dragon exhales a breath of destructive energy. that consumes everything in its path. However, another Taisu observes the scene from a distance. With determination, he activates his diamond powers, and his body begins to be enveloped in a resilient crystalline armor. Under Jihyung's watchful gaze, the broom-haired man shapes a majestic, dominant dragon. The creature rises with a roar, charging toward the bone dragon at an astonishing speed. In a decisive instant, Taesu uses the momentum of his creation to propel himself toward his enemies, wielding a diamond staff in his hands. With a swift and precise movement, he directly attacks Jihyung, unleashing a fierce battle. But the fight does not stop there. They continue exchanging blows with such intensity that within moments, their struggle takes them beyond the atmosphere into the void of space. Their battle is so ferocious that it spreads to unexpected places, destroying everything in its wake and endangering innocent lives. The massive, devastating blows leave scarred on the terrain, reviving the traces of past battles fought by Taesu in the same place. But the chaos does not end there. Amid the clash, something even more terrifying begins to unfold. From the horizon, multiple crimson portals start opening over the earth. From within, monsters emerge, grotesque creatures advancing mercilessly. Just as one of them is about to devour a defenseless Chet, a hunter rushes in with overwhelming speed. It is Lucas's son. In the blink of an eye, he appears among the rubble and, without hesitation, rescues the child from the beast's grasp. With lethal precision, he slices the monster in two, giving it no chance. His movements are precise and ruthless, worthy of someone who has inherited his father's formidable powers. Wasting no time, the young man charges into battle, facing the horrors of monsters emerging from the portals with unwavering determination. Meanwhile, the fight between Taesu and Jihyung reaches a new critical point. In a decisive moment, Jihyung lands a precise blow on Taesu, making him retreat for the first time. Not losing the advantage, he summons multiple red portals around him. From them, countless twisted, sharp bone arms emerge, stretching out like tentacles, ready to trap Taesu in their deadly grasp. But Taesu is not willing to fall so easily. With a cold, calculating gaze, he activates his special ability, the power to revive fallen hunters. An icy air envelops the battlefield as a figure emerges from the shadows. It is the Ice Huntress. The moment she returns to life, the Huntress acts with deadly precision. In a swift move, she grabs Jihyung's ankle and, with a single touch, freezes him instantly. Her icy eyes meet those of the bone monster watching her. In that brief exchange of glances, a silent thread is sealed between them. But this is only the beginning. Alongside the revived Huntress, more shadows of former hunters emerge. Like specters of unfinished vengeance, they advance with a single purpose: to reach Jihyung. For a few crucial seconds, Jihyung remained motionless, trapped between ice and the shadows of his enemies. This is the opportunity Taesu has been waiting for. Without wasting a moment, he breaks free from the bone arm's grip and, with a devastating impulse, soars into the air. Heading straight, activating his powers, Taesu concentrates all his energy on the bone monster's neck, ready to strike with lethal precision. However, something surprises him. The power he summons to slash Jihyung's neck is effortlessly caught by him, avoiding any damage. Before Taesu can react, Jihyung counters with a direct and brutal blow to his face, slamming him forcefully into the hard ground. The impact is so devastating that Taesu is violently hurled across the terrain, landing inside an underground water reservoir. But Taesu was not alone. Other hunters, members of the World Alliance, rush to his rescue. As they pull him from the water, Juan Wuchi looks at him firmly and, with a voice filled with determination, reminds him that 6 years ago, he saved the world and became the hero everyone revered. Now, more than ever, he asks him to fight as he did in the past, assuring him that all the hunters present will lend their strength to defeat their common enemy. But their union is fleeting. Without hesitation, Taesu accepts the power they offer him, only to betray them the very next moment. In a single move, he eliminates all the hunters around him, one after another, without showing a trace of doubt or mercy. Jihyung watches the scene in disbelief as, before his very eyes, the monster called Taesu begins to absorb the powers of the fallen hunters, feeding on their energy like an insatiable creature. Even so, Ji-hyun quickly wonders if that is truly his ability, but before he can get a clear answer, Tae-soo crushes him with an overwhelming gravitational force, forcing him to kneel under its immense pressure. The bone monster, seeing what has happened, starts laughing uncontrollably. His laughter echoes like a disturbing sound, filled with sinister joy. Then, with a voice dripping with venom, he drops a revelation that shakes the hunter to his very core. Tae-soo had killed his father with his own hands. The impact of those words ignites fury in Tae-soo's heart. His eyes burn with rage, his muscles tense. With a furious scream, he demands that he be silent, but in a swift and lethal move, Ji-hyun's sword cuts through the air, and in an instant, Tae-soo's head falls to the ground. Before Tae-soo completely closed his eyes, his mind took him back to his childhood, to a memory he could never erase. He saw himself, a fragile and fearful child, apologizing to his father for something beyond his control, being born as a non-awakened being. His father's response was immediate and cruel. Without a word, he delivered a strong slap that sent him to the ground. Tae-soo barely had time to recover, for his father abruptly turned toward his mother. What came next was even worse. His small ears filled with the screams of his mother's pain as his father mercilessly beat her. Desperate, the hidden child covered his ears with both hands, trying to block out the sounds, clinging to the hope that if he couldn't hear them, maybe the horror would disappear. But there came a point where it was impossible to ignore. His body trembled with fear, but his heart pounded with an unfamiliar rage. And then, without thinking twice, he grabbed a knife and lunged at his father. With all his strength, he jumped and plunged the blade into his father's neck. Blood gushing out immediately. But the most shocking thing happened in the next instant. He felt a surge of energy coursing through his body. His father's powers transferred into him. And for the first time in his life, Tae-soo experienced what it meant to possess that. His surprise was immense, but his mother's was not the same. Despite the fact that her son had saved her life, she did not look at him with gratitude, but with something colder, more distant. And without saying a single word, she made her decision. She fled. She left behind her home and her children, as if she couldn't bear to face what she had just witnessed. That was when his brother appeared, calling Tae-soo by name. His gaze fell on their father's lifeless body, and on the little boy's face, uncertainty about what would come next was reflected. After that, what happened next is something everyone knows. Events unfolded with the inevitability of a fate already written, as if each action was predestined to follow its course, with no possibility of change. But what not everyone knew was that while Tae-soo slept peacefully, he was actually being tormented. Within him resided countless people, their memories and powers intertwined, in his mind like a constant echo of the past. Every night, in his dreams, those figures chased him, tormenting him with their presence, plunging him into an endless cycle of suffering. Their screams, their resentful gazes, and their unending pain trapped him in a nightmare from which he could not escape. And like every time, he woke up with a start, his breath wriggled from terror. Beside him, the healer watched him calmly. Her gaze conveyed understanding and a certain sadness as she asked the same question as always. Another nightmare. She understood his suffering better than anyone. After all, she was aware of the burden he carried inside, of what it meant to harbor within his body the mana and memories of so many people. She murmured that it must be painful. Everything he had experienced, everything he still carried within him. Then, as if she needed to grasp the magnitude of his burden, she asked how many people lived inside him. But Tae-soo was exhausted, tired of everything, sick of the curse that pursued him without respite. With bitterness, he asked if she could seal that ability. The healer shook her head before replying that she could only heal wounds, but not seal something like that. If he truly wanted to rid himself of it, then he would have to do it himself. Her response fell like an unbearable weight on Tae-soo's shoulders. Enraged, he cursed her under his breath. If he could do it, he would have already done it. Desperate, he fell to his knees on the ground, clenching his fists in helplessness. It couldn't be possible. Things couldn't stay this way. They had to meet again. His words were not directed at the healer, but at Yeju, his friend who had been eliminated. With a heavy eye, he closed his eyes and let the memories envelop him. At first, he tried to bring Yeju back, but it was all in vain. Every attempt failed, and his desperation grew until it consumed him completely. However, in his anguish, he found an idea. Intense gravity distorts space-time. That was the key. He didn't need to resurrect Yeju. What he really needed was time, and now he was convinced he could recover it. With this idea in mind, he began to experiment. For countless days and nights, he explored the limits of gravity-based powers, tested in more than 14,000 skill combinations. In the process, he destroyed entire continents and came close to death dozens of times. But his determination never wavered. In the end, he succeeded. He had managed to turn back time. However, there was a fatal problem. No matter how many times he tried it or how much he perfected his technique, he always encountered the same unbreakable barrier. He could not return to a point before he threw Ji-hyung into the red puddle. Every time he tried, he could not go back before Yeju's death. No matter how much he tried or how many times, he repeated the process. That was the question that tormented him relentlessly. Why? What was the reason that limited him? In his desperation, he wondered if, by closing the red portal, the timeline had fractured, splitting into different realities. If that was true, then it meant he no longer had access to the exact point he needed to reach. However, after reflecting more calmly, he dismissed that idea. No, it couldn't be that. Something else had to be happening, something he had yet to understand. Convinced that there had to be a way, he began using all the knowledge and resources he possessed. He would not let the laws of time stop him. But despite using every available tool, exhausting all possible strategies, and attempting to turn back time countless times, the result was always the same. An absolute failure. Each attempt led him to the same conclusion. He could not change what had already happened. And so, after countless failures and a desperation that threatened to consume him completely, he finally stopped trying. Now, in the present, his gaze was fixed on Kang Ji-hyung. He blamed him for everything. With cold determination, he undid his own body, only to reconstruct it immediately in front of his opponent. The hunter, driven by his fierce will to survive, refused to give in. He would not die there, not without doing everything possible to eliminate him first. With that thought in mind, he concentrated his energy and formed in his hand the power to turn back time. He expanded it, increasing its reach, ensuring that his only chance would not be wasted. He could not allow his fate to end this way. The unleashed power enveloped Taesu, absorbing him and dragging him into the flow of time. He returned 24 hours back. Realizing what he had accomplished, a smile crossed his face. He had returned. However, his joy was short-lived. Exactly 24 hours later, the result was the same. He lost again. This became his 138th regression and death. That is when he returns. Again, but this time it's different. Because although everything follows its course, Taesu knew that Lee Yumin already knew everything. So he corners her and mentions Ji-hyung and Foul, something that leaves the woman confused. That is when he reveals that he can reverse time and that she has already told him all of this before. He questions her about who she is and how she knew in advance that everything would end this way. At first, the woman did not want to answer, but in the end, she decides she confesses that her power is to read and heal the flow of life. But as she grew stronger, she began to perceive even greater flows. From the current of water and air to the heartbeat of the earth, the moon, and the solar system. She also feels the force that shapes the galaxies. Everything that can be perceived in the world. At the end of it all, she also saw the birth and destruction of the universe they live in. She confesses that she has seen the future and that Kang Ji-hyung will appear once more. And when that happens, the world will be destroyed. In the end, everything will be destroyed. So she simply lived without. However, she reveals that in the future she saw it never happened that he could reverse time. The man, angry, asks her how he can trust her, to which Yu Miti questions if there is any reason not to believe her. Besides, if she were lying, he would have already reversed time to torture her. He agreed with her and then asked her for information on how to eliminate Kang Ji-hyung. But to Taesu's misfortune, she replied that it was not possible. In the present, he gets furious again over losing and activates his power once more. He remembers that when he lost for the second time, he noticed that Ji-hyung had already obtained the power of hell. The third time, he reflected that no matter how strong, he kept losing. Even with the ability to go back in time, the result was always the same. However, Tae-soo continued training to eliminate Ji-hyung. But when he reached the 138th time, he concluded that it was impossible. He reflected that even when he went back to the past to torture Yumi, she said nothing, not a single word. He questioned whether he truly could not defeat Ji-hyung. He decided to go back once more, exactly 6 years ago, when he had thrown Tae-soo into the red portal and the whole town was congratulating. He reflected that he was already at the limit of temporal inversion. He wondered if reviving his mother would make Ji-hyung, but then he reflected that no matter what he did, he could not revive someone who had already been eliminated. Even with Lee Yumi, it would be useless. He concluded that there was no other way. His only choice was to eliminate Kang Ji-hyung, revealing that Tae-soo had eliminated everyone who. Thus, 6 years had passed, and Tae-soo eliminated all the awakened ones in the world and absorbed. When Kang Ji-hyung appeared, he closed all the blood gates. However, his opponent opened a portal himself and emerged for battle. With all the powers he had, he used them and erased him. But unfortunately, Ji-hyung was too strong, so Tae-soo proceeded to revive him and eliminate him again. The blue-haired one even tried to trap him in the hardest diamond and send him to the deepest part of the earth, intending to seal him there. But the monster managed to escape and eliminated Tae-soo again. Even when the awakened one destroyed the earth, Ji-hyung managed to traverse space to eliminate him once more. Even when Tae-soo threw the bone monster into a black hole, it managed to escape to eliminate the blue-haired one again. Tae-soo reflected that he had eliminated his mother in front of him and thrown him back into a red portal. He believed that as long as that did not change, Ji-hyung would keep chasing him and eliminate. He screamed at Kang Ji-hyung to stop, cursing him, only to be destroyed once again. That was how Tae-soo, after reversing time thousands of times, realized something. Eliminating Kang Ji-hyung was impossible. Then we returned to when Yumi said that it was impossible to defeat the bone monster and that when he appeared, the world would be destroyed. So the truth was simply that Tae-soo had lived carefree for 6 years, but when Ji-hyung appeared, he eliminated him. To avoid dying, he reversed time. And so it was, repeating the same situation and over. But suddenly, one day, he realized something. Tae-soo, in the middle of his time travel, realized something. Throughout all the time he spent eliminating Kang Ji-hyung, he always acted alone. And in a way, it made sense, because apart from his only friend, he never got close to anyone. However, there was something that troubled him. He wondered what would happen if this time he bound him alone. Determined to try a different path, instead of eliminating the awakened ones, he chose to tell the truth. He revealed to all the hunters in the world what had really happened. From the moment he himself eliminated Kang Ji-hyung's mother to the countless times he had traveled back in time, every detail was exposed without reservation. After revealing everything, he pleaded for their help. But as expected, the hunters' gazes were cold, incredulous. No one believed him. No one supported him. However, Tae-soo did not give up. If rejection was his fate, then he would challenge it with perseverance. Again and again, he traveled back in time, thousands of times. He sought to change the outcome, because in the past, those who died unjustly at his hands, the unknowns sacrificed without reason, the lives that were extinguished without even understanding why, they all had their own stories. They all had to live their own life. And at some point, all of them at the same time had a conversation with Tae-soo. But he didn't only talk to the living. He also began to converse with the dark forces he had absorbed. A conversation between his being and the power that pulsed within him. Time went on. He wondered how many times he had gone back, and he couldn't even be certain anymore. But finally, Tae-soo finished his conversation with all the dark forces inside his body. And at that moment, something changed. Only after all of that, or maybe just at that moment, did he dare to face his own past. He reflected on the cruelty of his actions and the horror of the consequences he had caused. Every memory was an unbearable weight, a burden that suffocated him with the certainty of his own responsibility. It was for that reason, for that precise reason, that he could not ignore it. He couldn't allow anyone else to suffer as he had, for others to fall into the abyss of pain and despair. The suffering of losing a loved one drove him to seek redemption, to wish, even in vain, to apologize to Kang Ji-young. But reality was relentless, and fate had not changed. Because when he appeared, Tae-soo felt obligated to eliminate him. However, unlike before, he was no longer alone. He had formed the World Hunter Alliance, and with them, he was ready to face any threat, no matter the cost. But unfortunately, all that effort was a grave mistake. Tae-soo gave it his all. He traveled back in time again and again, facing battle after battle, without hesitating for a single moment. He memorized every one of Kang Ji-young's attacks, studying them in detail, trying to find a weakness, a crack, anything that could give him a chance. At the same time, he guided each of the hunters precisely, instructing them, training them, making sure every movement was perfectly coordinated. He did everything he could so they could fight together in perfect sync. But no matter how many times he tried it, no matter how many strategies he defeated or how much and perfected his movements, the outcome was always the same. In a complete defeat, the healer's words echoed in his mind. Eliminating Kang Ji-young is impossible. And that made him wonder if, after all that effort, anything had really changed. He apologized to everyone, but above all, to Kang Ji-young. He felt it. He felt it for everything he had done. Just at that moment, when he was about to be eliminated once again, something happened. A miracle, or perhaps a punishment from fate. The one who once abandoned him when he was just a child came back to protect him in front of her son's eyes. Ji-young, realizing who he had eliminated, couldn't help but wonder if that woman was his mother, only to, in the next instant, let out a mocking laugh and say he almost invited her out while he pierced her face without hesitation and immediately split her in two. Everything happened before Tae-soo's eyes. He, unable to hold back, screamed in fury, letting out all the rage he had been accumulating. Tae-soo recalls his mother's story. Her father was a member of the National Assembly, her mother a judge, and she was born out of a strategic marriage. This meant that by those standards, his mother was required to be perfect from an early age. He adds that it was a hard life, yet his mother never complained. She was flawless, complete, the very embodiment of perfection. Or at least, that's what she believed, because for her, that was life's only truth. But she never realized the emotion she had repressed until a single choice turned out imperfect. That is how love was born. More precisely, during her first year at university, she fell in love with a senior at her faculty, and then, as a result of her actions, she became pregnant. That pregnancy changed everything. Her lover vanished, and her family rejected her. That was the price of an imperfect choice. Or at least, that's how he saw his older brother, as the price his mother had paid. But at that moment, she understood something. If she was going to love, she would have to do it perfectly too. Back in the present, Tae-soo reflects that, throughout all his regressions, his mother never appeared, even once. This makes him question why she's there now. Could it be because she finally sees him as a perfect being? Or perhaps she has only come to have a perfect death? Ji-young realizes she is his mother and comments, almost amused, that he had nearly flirted with her. At the same time, he pierces her with one of his bones and instantly splits her in half. Tae-soo screams in rage, but deep within, he feels something deeper: despair, anger, anguish. He has lost his mother right before his eyes. And after that whirlwind of emotions, he calls out to Kang Ji-young, only to ask him if that was how he felt. Then, Tae-soo tells Ji-young everything: his countless deaths, his countless regressions, his final realization. But after saying everything, he confesses he won't go back in time again, and he starts to apologize. He's done something terrible to him. He's sorry for everything. Ji-young asks him why he did it. Even more, why he did it with his mother. The young man remains silent for a few seconds. Then, he lets out a faint laugh. He confesses that he doesn't know. Those are his last words, because the next instant, he loses his head. As his head rolls across the ground, his last thought is clear. This truly is the end. It's been a very long life, far too long. Han Tae-soo returned to the starting point, right where he had thrown Ji-young into the red portal. Confused, he wondered if he had come back again. With a smile, he concluded that he must have returned without realizing it, just before losing his life. Without wasting time, he activated his diamond blade and, without hesitation, decapitated his own head. It was time to die again. But there he was again, alive. Bewildered, he grabbed a spear from someone nearby and furiously struck his own face. He wanted to ensure he wouldn't return in time. But unfortunately, he did. In that instant, the question struck him like lightning. What was this? He tried once more. The result was the same. Again and again, each attempt brought him back to the same point. Frustration consumed him. He muttered angrily that it was all a damn joke. Then, he raised his voice in a desperate cry, asking what they wanted from him. He had only wished to achieve realization before dying. Wasn't it enough to die with dignity? Hadn't he done the right thing before surrendering? But time offered no answers. With one last outburst of fury, he shouted to the sky that he didn't want to keep living, that he only wished to die. The desire was so intense that without hesitation, he self-destructed. And yet, there he was again, alive. In the same place, cheers and applause surrounded him. They congratulated him for winning the battle, but he heard none of it. He had only one question in mind: why and how? He screamed with all his might, cursing the entire world. It was then that Li Yuman approached him and asked him to calm down. Upon seeing her, Taesu looked at her in desperation. He knew she had the answers. He begged her to tell him what was happening. Yuman watched him in silence before responding. She explained that throughout his infinite regressions, he had accumulated layers of magical power, energy that remained trapped in the timeline, twisting its causality. Time itself had closed. Now, every time he died, he would return exactly to the same point as before, no matter what he did, and from that moment on, 6 years later, inevitably, he would die at Ji Young's hands. She asked if he understood and informed him that he would keep dying, infinitely, eternally, and forever. The words echoed in his mind like an unbreakable echo. Taesu could barely whisper a few words, not fully comprehending, but confusion soon turned into something deeper. Finally, his voice trembled as he asked the only question that truly mattered. He wanted to know what she was. Yuman smiled slightly, and then she revealed herself. Only Taesu understood the meaning of her words. He was speechless. Then, little by little, he began to laugh. It was not a laugh of happiness or relief. It was a bitter laugh. A laugh mixed with a curse upon the fate that had condemned him. Time continued its course, and what was destined to happen happened once more. Ji Hyung eliminated Taesu, and the world began to collapse. The bone monster watched the horizon, where his army vanished into the distance, destroying everything in its path. It was then that someone approached him. It was Li Yuman, who without warning, wrapped him in a hug. Then she thanked him for his hard work. At another moment, it is explained that the ruler of Peo, has destroyed the world over and over again in an endless cycle. For an infinite time, he repeated the destruction so many times that he eventually forgot who he was and why he was doing it. Only annihilation and emptiness remained. However, one day, he felt something different: loneliness. For the first time in his existence, he rushed to create life. He tried countless times, but each attempt ended in failure, again and again, without success. Until, in a final desperate act, he tore out his own heart. A part of him remained alive. From there, a life was born, and at the same time, that life was also his daughter. Ji Young, upon hearing the story, refused to believe it, but Li Yuman did not waver. With firmness, she affirmed that it was true. That girl was her. As she spoke, she began to recount a bit of her story. She said that she was human and therefore could not live in hell. From the moment she was born, she was abandoned in the early years of the earth, while the world outside the gate slowly closed. Thus, 4 billion years ago, the earth was destroyed. Li Yumin confessed that, at that time, she only wanted to die, but due to Pale's heart, she could never find eternal rest. If she entered a dimension different from Pale's, even if she lost her life, she would always revive. The only desperation greater than immortality was the possibility that Earth would be destroyed once more, because if that happened, she would never be able to see Vaya again. Loneliness and hatred were her only companions for billions of years. No one could ever understand her. Because for someone who had been alone for as long as she had, others had no meaning. However, when she loved, the loneliness of so many years vanished easily. She immersed herself in the happiness, even if it was fleeting. But as time passed, the people she loved ended up leaving this world. Even so, she did not give it much importance because she fell in love again and again. And then, one day, she had children. She saw them being born. She saw her children have grandchildren. And then, her grandchildren continued their lineage. She learned to accept goodbyes, because with each loss came the opportunity to meet new people. She confessed that over infinite time, she had loved countless times. But in the end, they all disappeared. One after another, they fell under the weight of time. And she, unchanging, remained. Only she was left behind. Loneliness settled in her bones, enveloping her like a shadow that never disappeared. Although she managed to overcome it, the pain of billions of years remained, latent and immortal. She could no longer bear it. And at that moment, for the first time, she understood her father. She understood why he had been willing to tear out his heart. It was not just a sacrifice. It was the only way to erase the weight of loneliness. It was at that instant that Pael's heart showed her the future. A single future, one in which she could see her father again. Back in the present, she revealed what she knew. In a distant future, the Bloodgate uprising would break out, and the catalyst for everything would be Kang Ji-young. The young man, astonished, questioned her words. He wanted to know what she was talking about. She responded calmly. The mere fact that he had overcome the transformation into a monster by himself and escaped from hell made him an anomaly, a future that only he could reach, one among multiple possible futures. Ji-young felt a chill run down his spine. With a trembling voice, he asked if she had been using him. He couldn't believe it. But then, doubt consumed him. He wanted to know more. Had she used his father as well? His mother? Had everything been part of her plan? Lee Yumin did not hesitate. She nodded firmly. Ji-young clenched his teeth. His rage exploded, and without hesitation, he prepared to eliminate her. But before he could do anything, she gently touched his forehead. In an instant, his bone armor crumbled, turning to dust. Unfazed, Lee Yumin spoke, saying that the future she saw only reached that point. Ji-young cursed her, but his body did not move. His anger was useless. He added that everything was her fault. But Yumin continued. As compensation, she said, she had given Tae-soo the most tragic death. She explained that she had trapped him in a time loop, condemned to die and revive infinitely at her hands. Tae-soo would eventually understand the reason for her decision. Then, with chilling calmness, she asked him not to worry. Everything would end soon. She knew that only in the same dimension as her father could she die. And if she disappeared, her father would too. That was the day she understood Bael's loneliness. And she made her decision. She would see her father again, and she would destroy the world. Then she would use her own death to end him as well. As she spoke, she began to extract her heart, because only then would the cycle of loneliness end. For a moment, her thoughts drifted to Ji-young. Perhaps that was what he needed as well, because although he had endured unbearable pain for his mother, he had never found rest. What he felt for her was not love. It was only loneliness. Love, in the end, was nothing more than a cruel illusion to fill the voids in the heart. It could make one forget loneliness, but it also etched it even more deeply into the soul. Love was nothing more than a curse, and now everything had to come to an end, extracting the heart and destroying it. After doing that, the woman asked her father if he was angry. Pael calmly looked at her and responded with another question, wanting to know what she was talking about. With a serene yet firm voice, he affirmed that she was his daughter, his other half, and that he could never be angry with her. Ji-young, who had been observing everything from a certain distance, couldn't believe what he was seeing. His expression reflected a mixture of confusion, anguish, and frustration. In his mind, one question echoed strongly: what the hell were they doing? Little by little, he began to understand. He now realized that she was living someone else's life, that she had eliminated her mother, her father, and that she was now willing to destroy the entire world. He wondered if she truly planned to end everything, if she really intended to erase everyone. And for what? Simply because she felt alone? That idea was unbearable to him. He clenched his teeth in anger, thinking that it was all complete nonsense. He remembered that Pael had brought him back when he had already fully become a monster. And at that moment, it was Pael's heart that gave him the chance to save his mother. He also remembered Lucas and those words that still resonated within him, not to lose faith until the very end. Then it became clear. That was how it would be. If this was his fate, if this was the place where everything ended, then he wanted Pael's power. Resolutely, without thinking twice, he jumped and bit into the heart of the bone monster, sinking his teeth into it with brutal determination. The woman, seeing this, looked at him with a mixture of surprise and disdain. She commented that he was now nothing more than a mere human and that there was no way he could absorb Pael's power. But at that very moment, the world changed. The sky, previously gray and lifeless, was entirely dyed crimson and following a flash of intense red light. The entire landscape transformed. It was Ji-young. He was beginning to absorb all of Pael's power. The woman stared at him in disbelief and shouted that it was absurd. She asked if he still hadn't realized. She said the only way to end loneliness was to die, and that this applied to him as well. But Ji-young firmly refused. He said he would see his mother again. The woman observed him more closely. As she watched, she realized he was fully absorbing Pael's power. That single truth overwhelmed her, and she understood that ultimately everything boiled down to this. That was a destiny. After that revelation, she was absorbed. And then immediately afterward, a burst of light exploded where they stood. The earth began to break apart. Everything started to collapse. The planet, once full of life, exploded in a great blast. And space, that dark, infinite sea, was illuminated by the energy of the end, as if a new star had been born, one more among so many others that once were worlds. But this was not the end. Ji-young was still there, floating in the emptiness of space, or at least what remained of him, his bones. In the midst of darkness and silence, he observed himself. Only two questions surfaced in his mind, floating in nothingness. What had he been doing a moment ago, and who was he? Then he remembered. Activating his powers, he spoke his name. He was the administrator of hell. Well, without hesitation, he entered the red portal he had left open. That was how we returned to the beginning, to the story of Pael. A being who had spent infinite, immeasurable time repeating one single act, destroying the world. He had forgotten who he was. He had forgotten why he did it. Only destruction, only ruins. That was all he left behind. But at some point, something inside him changed. A pang of emptiness, a sense of loss, and then he felt loneliness. He tried to create life. He tried many times. He always failed, until one day, already drained, tired, and broken inside, he tore out his own heart. And with that gesture, desperate but full of meaning, he created his clone, or rather, his daughter. A story we already knew, a story that in one way or another repeated itself again, as if the destruction of the world and its creation were part of an eternal cycle, a loop in time, where what seemed to be the end was nothing but the beginning of a new reality in which everything had already happened. But who could really know for sure? After all, the one who caused the cracks was Pael, or at least that's what he remembered.